Good morning. We're going to start here in just a second. Thanks for taking your seats. And it looks like we're ready to go online. Alrighty. We did a roll call yesterday, so we'll dispense with that today, but I can tell you looking around, we do have quorum. We're picking up on an agenda item we didn't get to yesterday, which is an update on the implementation of 22 Wyoming Session Law 56, which deals with K through 3 reading assessment and intervention legislation. We'd like to have members from the Wyoming Department of Education come forth.
Senator Ellis,
Yes.
my apologies. It is my understanding we do need to take roll call this morning.
Okay.
In addition, we've received several questions about internet connectivity in the room. Just want to remind everybody that it is the first day of a new month, so there is a new password. So if you're not able to connect, that's probably the reason. We have posted the new passwords on all the walls so that if you want to connect, you have that ability. Do
Okay.
you mind if I dispense with the roll?
Let's do the roll call then.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Beitman. Senator Salazar. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom.
Here.
Thank you. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton.
Here.
Senator Scott.
Here.
Acting Chairman Senator Ellis.
Here.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Mr. Chairman. I'm Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education, and I am here with my colleague, Mr. Trent Carroll, who is our Chief Operations Officer. And we are here today to, this morning to provide a brief update to the changes to Wyoming Statute 213401, which is the Reading Assessment Intervention Statute. This update is required by statute, and you'll receive an update throughout the 22 interim and 2023 interim sessions until the work is completed. So the two areas that we're going to speak about briefly this morning are the rules promulgation process and then an update on the reporting requirements. So to begin with, in Section 1D, which was a new change to the existing statute, it requires that the WDE work in consultation with various stakeholders to promulgate rules. And then later in the statute, Section 4A requires that we work with a stakeholder committee to complete a study. So the WDE has determined that it would be probably most efficient and provide some continuity in the work to create one group of individuals that function both as that stakeholder committee and those that we will collaborate with. So to create the stakeholder committee, we did roll out an announcement on April 4th to invite individuals that were interested in participating to express that interest. We received a total of 64 applications per se expressing interest, and I have to tell you all 64 are more than qualified to serve on this. We were really excited to see the quality of individual that wanted to participate. Recognizing that 64 was entirely too many to have an effective work size group, we've chosen to narrow it down to 15. So we have, I should mention also that the 64 applicants represented 28 of our 48 school districts. So as we work to narrow down that group, we wanted to be cognizant to include across the state geographical representation, as well as district size, as well as role that the individual might represent. So we have individuals self-reported what their role was. They had 8 categories to choose from. Those were superintendent or assistant superintendent, special education director, elementary principal, instructional facilitator, literacy coach, elementary reading teacher, reading interventionist, or curriculum director. So we ended up with, like I said, 15 that we have extended an invitation to. We have had confirmation from 14 of those 15. We, the districts then that are represented are Albany 1, Bighorn 1, Campbell 1, Fremont 24, Fremont 25, Hot Springs 1, Laramie 1, Lincoln 1, Lincoln 2, Natrona 1, Park 6, Sheridan 2, Sweetwater 2, Teton 1, and Weston 1. And I should say all districts are represented, but individuals are from those districts that are representing the state as a whole. That represents what we determined were 3 large-size districts, 11 middle size, so from about 600 to 4,000 is that middle small and middle large group, and then 1 that represents a very small. We have then 1 superintendent, 1 special education director, 2 elementary principals, 4 instructional facilitators, 3 literacy coaches, 3 reading interventionists, and 1 curriculum directors. At least half, if not 3/4, did come through the elementary teaching as the beginning of their career, so they have that classroom experience as well. So I think our memo notes that we will meet our first time no later than June 15th, but that's proving complicated to organize the schedules around 15 volunteers. So we will be meeting most likely the 3rd or 4th week in June. We will meet again early August. The first meeting will focus on the criteria required to select or identify appropriate screening instruments. The meeting in August will focus on the professional development requirements, and we'll determine at that point if we need a 3rd meeting to talk about identifying characteristics of students that struggle to develop literacy. All right, the reporting requirements then changed just a little bit. So as you know, each district is required annually to report if all of their elementary schools in their district are not meeting the 85% proficiency as determined by YTOP at the end of 3rd grade. So part of those requirements are numeric data, while others are narrative in form. So there were some additional changes to those reporting requirements. So we're working to try to find a process that will be sustainable with potentially future changes to the data collection. So instead of having our districts experience a change every year from this format to that format, we're looking at something that might be sustainable, that we might be able to just add an element to or remove one should that happen going forward.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, Committee. Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. So just a couple of quick updates on the work that we're currently doing to meet the requirements of Section 2 and Section 3 of Senate Enrolled Act 28. So one of the requirements in Section 2 is that we report back to this committee on or before September 1st, 2023, the total amount that districts expended to meet the professional development requirements in Section 1 of the bill. So we've started, we have two key priorities that we're focused on. One is communication and awareness with our school districts. So we want to make sure that every district is aware of the requirement for this upcoming school year, that they can track the expended amount for K-3 specific professional development, so they can report that back to us. And then the other priority is for us to figure out kind of an outline for what that reporting mechanism will look like. So we started that conversation with our School Finance Data Advisory Committee, SIFDAC, and we'll actually be meeting next week with the WASBO Association, school business officials up here in Casper to discuss this further. We have an outline of a collection. This will just be a one-time collection as it stands right now in the law. And so we will have that information to report back next year. Section 3 appropriated $300,000 to school districts that fully expend the amount that they receive in the block grant for professional development. We've been working on a model to allocate those funds following next year when we have that data. We have a model that we think will work based on, some of you might remember the $2 million appropriation a couple years ago under the special education cap for out-of-district placements. We had a similar pro rata model that we used for that. I think we could use it again for this with some tweaks. So that's the work that we've been doing. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the Department of Education?
Could I just add one thing before we move?
Sure, Ms.
Uh,
Hamel?
Um, I'd like to just, I know, deviate from the memo just a little bit because letters training was brought up multiple times yesterday. And I just thought I'd provide some quick numbers for you all around that as well. Our first group of teachers that participated and administrators started last fall. It's a 4-semester commitment for teachers that are doing the letters training. Our first group then just ended their first year, so 2 semesters. It's about a 40-hour a semester commitment. It's a big lift. We had just over 400 teachers begin last fall. We had 120 early childhood educators participate and around 25 administrators take the letters for administrators. We do have some administrators taking the full letters program. We kicked off another group of 400 in January, and they've just finished their first semester. And then right now we have about 120 more early childhood educators signed up to start in the fall. We have another 25 to 30 administrators signed up for the fall offering, and we have almost 500 additional educators across the state ready to start this fall. So with that, we'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any questions for the department? Thank you for your presentation. Who in the audience would like to testify on the topic of K-3 reading assessment? We have one person. Is there anyone else who'd like to testify? Is there anyone else online that's signed up to testify? None, so we'll have one person come testify on this. Welcome.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Kevin Mitchell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. And I just want to give you a snapshot of where we're at. I've asked school districts, so we repeatedly hear people talk about how many students in Wyoming can't read, and they're interpreting data wrong. And the measurement that they're using to determine that is not accurate as well. So just going to start, and I'm not an assessment expert, but when we use YTOP, 3rd grade ELA data, and then say that kids can't read, that data is not all about reading. It's about all the language arts standards. So it does not accurately measure whether a student is proficient reader or not. And then people repeatedly say the percentage of students that are below proficient can't read. That is an inaccurate statement as well. So I've asked the school districts to report how many 3rd graders cannot read. And you have the data in front of you. 40 out of 48 districts responded just this past week. We're short from the WDE October count. The state had 6,883 3rd graders, and we're reporting on 5,993. 200 students across the state in that count cannot read at all. That's 3.34%, not 50%. And in my understanding of some data, there's about a national norm where 2% of students will never be able to read because of their severe disabilities. So we're not too far off in Wyoming. Now that doesn't mean that they can read at 3rd grade proficiency level, but they can read. So that's kind of where I'm, just want to clarify that as leaders and legislators, when you use this data that we're given, it should be stated in terms of, if you want to use this, I would say using YTOP data, so many percent of students are not proficient at the 3rd grade level, not cannot read. That's quite a difference of deciding whether someone can't read, or they might be at the 2nd grade level, not the 3rd grade level. I would stand for any questions.
Representative Summers?
Madam Chairman, thank you. So a question I would have, so, and I probably missed this, what's the acronym ESL?
English is second language,
Which
so those
it's
are
not-
students
It's not
that.
like, it's like ELL?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then, Madam Chairman, my second question is, I would assume you got 1,123 on IEPs. I would assume those 200 are on IEPs if they can't read, or how, but that's just a special ed designation that is separate.
Mr. Mitchell?
Madam Chairman, Representative Summers, that I can't correlate that. You, not necessarily if you're not reading at grade level, would you be on an IEP?
Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Mitchell? Representative Nyman and then Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just curiously, how do they break down, there's 4 different levels of reading: advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic. What constitutes below basic? I mean, what determines below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced? If you could kind of maybe help me understand that a little better.
Mr. Mitchell?
Madam Chairman, Representative Nyman, I'm not an expert on that, but we actually have a process the Department of Ed leads called a professional judgment panel. And that group of educators, stakeholders across the state set those cut scores. And they have a facilitator that comes in and helps them do that. But I would refer to Mrs. Hamill from the Department of Ed for a more accurate statement, but the local people do that.
Representative Harshman?
Thank you. And my question really is for Ms. Hamill, if she can just come up, sit up here. You guys don't have to leave if just. And I just, quick question for Mr. Mitchell too. So this is a survey of 3rd grade teachers of districts?
Mr. Mitchell?
Madam Chairman, Representative Harshman, I sent it to superintendents, and I know from some feedback from saying, well, we're gonna curriculum directors could have this data. So I'm not exactly sure who gathered it. Some school districts might have went to 3rd grade, but the data itself is warehoused, could be warehoused at the district level.
Okay. And then my question, Madam Chairman, is for the department. I think I heard you say that, so we determine this 85% reading by the YTOP at the end of 3rd grade. And so that, I guess my question is, how many standards, language arts standards are there in 3rd grade reading? Are there like 3 or 4 different, probably got writing in there, probably got reading. So I guess I'm wondering if that score is just gonna, just pull out those reading kind of questions that they answer on their iPad.
Ms. Hamill, welcome back. And if you'd like to also address Representative Nyman's question, if you have anything to add, welcome to do that.
Sure. Madam Chair, representatives, as you can see, Ms. Hernandez is here at the table with us because she is our standards and assessment expert at the agency. And I'm going to defer both questions to her.
Madam Chair, and as I only heard the latter question, I'll address that first and then ask the first one to be repeated. So for the 3rd grade ELA, the standards that are assessed, there are 5 domains on the assessment. So reading for information, reading for literature, writing, speaking and listening, and language. And within each of those domains, there are several standards that are assessed. So overall, I would have to look at the blueprint, but I think there's about 18 to 20 standards in total on that 3rd grade assessment.
So, Madam Chairman, just to follow, so on this 85%, is that determined by all 5 of those domains of standards, or do you just dice out those 2 in reading that you talked about to give this 85% score? Because I think what Mr. Mitchell said, I mean, you hear this, oh, half our kids can't read. And I mean, I'm in the education business and my wife has taught elementary school for years. I know many of these people and they'll say, hey, we have some kids who are problem readers, but it's not half our 3rd grade class can't read. I mean, that's just a nonsense statement. So I think we want to, I guess I want to learn a little more. How's YTOP? I mean, if a kid scores poorly in writing, or listening, is he gonna not, and he could make the 85, he or she could make the 85% in the reading piece. We'll never know that, I guess, unless this is just, we just pull out those questions in the reading standards. That's my point on this 85% measurement we're trying to get to.
Ms. Hernandez or Ms. Hamel?
Madam Chairman, Representative Harshman, with the purpose of the statewide assessment for federal purposes is to assess the depth and the breadth of the standards on grade level. So the use of that grade 3 assessment for YTOP to that 85% is not lined up to those 5 areas that are in that statute. It was kind of out of order, and so that is one thing that, was not intended for that purpose. But to answer your question, with the assessment, the results come in for all of that. They are broken out by domain, so they can see how students did in reading for information, reading for literature, but not specifically on phonetic awareness and phonics. And what we do at the department is also get the data from the assessment vendor, removing the writing part. So it takes that part out. And in all cases that we've seen, it only changes maybe 1% to 2% for a student's results. But we do collect that so that we can have that be more true representative comparison for that 85% mark.
So the
Follow up,
answer,
Ms.
Madam Chair,
Representative
so
Harshman?
The answer is yes, then you pull out the reading. Is that what I heard? You pull the reading part out?
Ms. Hernandez?
Madam Chairman, Representative Harshman, we pull out the writing from everything else, but the rest of that assessment is not directly connected to those 5 areas in the same way. The ELA standards are not just reading standards, they are a comprehensive set for all of the English language arts.
Madam Chair, last thing, then would you
Follow up.
mind just sending maybe to the committee just an email with kind of a link to the standards and maybe a link to a practice test? So we can kind of see what a 3rd grade test looks like and what those standards look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you follow up, Ms. Hernandez, with that?
I'm sorry,
Will you
Madam.
provide the information the
Yes.
representatives requested?
Yes, I will. Thank you. What was the first question to address?
Representative Nyman, did you still want to ask?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, my question is, evidently, when I look at that breakdown, I think we're discussing that white paper that was put out there earlier on, I think by Senator Scott, asked that to be put out. I believe the numbers showed it was 57.14% are performing at or below basic. And so I guess my question is, and trying to get some clarification here, what determines basic and below? And where would a child perform at, so that we can kind of all have a better understanding of what that determination was and why that was stated that way, so that we, whether there's there or not, I guess I need to understand a little bit better about what prompts that, or what's that rating.
Ms. Hernandez, I think we received a response that it's the professional judgment panel that comes together, but maybe a deeper dive into how they do that work.
Madam Chairman, Representative Nyman, we have a standard setting process. So even before the PJP work, an educator committee is convened to do a standard setting after the first operational assessment. So when those ELA assessments for math and ELA were done after YTOP was implemented in 2017, the summer of 2018, we had an educator committee convene for each of those. They do what's called an order item booklet review. So they see what a test could look like for a student in order from easiest to hardest. And as a group, or as several groups, they go through and they set the floor cut. So they start with making just barely statements, looking at the standards, and they say, what is just barely proficient for this standard? What is just barely for basic? And that's the separator between below basic, and then between basic and proficient and advanced. So when they set those just barely statements, then they look at the assessment items and they make those cuts in the book of where's that floor for the proficient level, where's that floor for the basic level. And then as several panels are doing that, then they come together and have discussion and make some refinements and make a final determination. So it is 100% educator judgment with educators that are in the classroom, in those grade levels, in those content areas, that have the expertise and understanding of what students are able to do.
Further questions? Then, Mr. Farmer?
Madam
did you have any?
Chairman.
Oh, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, I would comment on this, that when we looked at the report that our consultant gave us on the recalibration, there was a very clear statement in there that the students who were testing in the third grade ELA at basic and below basic were not reading adequately to participate in the future in the kind of economy we're trying to build, the high-tech world of the future. And that was basically the judgment of our consultants, Picus et al., that we hired as to what those test results meant. And so that's been the basics of the statements, that that percentage is not being adequately taught how to read, or doesn't, after third grade, doesn't adequately know how to read well enough to participate in the economy we're trying to create going forward. And I think you have to look at that. I think that's a pretty informed judgment. And those consultants, we've all been exposed to them now, are pretty skilled in this sort of thing. So I think that's what you're looking at, and not the ability to read at all. It's the ability to read adequately, and that's what counts, and that's where the problem is.
Thank you. Feel free to respond if anyone would like to. Thank you, Senator Scott. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. With that, that K through 3 portion of our discussion is closed. We'll move on to our agenda item for today, community college funding. And to kick us off, we'll have Sandy Caldwell come on up, and Michael Swank and Ben Moritz, please. Michael, we have some questions about redistricting lines, if we want to amend those.
Can we get a map drawn?
Is it too soon?
Like 1 hour from now? I'm good.
Welcome.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just say Albany County has some questions.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. I do have our Deputy Director, Dr. Ben Moritz with me, and then also our CFO, Mr. Michael Swank, who you all know very well. I may ask, may we also have Ms. Erin Taylor join us? She is a part of what we're presenting to you today.
Sounds good. Welcome.
We have a technical pause. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, we did have an added document for you today. It is publicly posted, but before we get into really the details of the mechanics of the allocation model, how the funding for the colleges work, and capital construction, we wanted to start off with some really great information. If I may, before we get into that, because I do want to start with that, I think some introductions are in order. We have a lot of people in the audience today, so if I may take just a moment to introduce a few people, I would respectfully request that. We have a whole lot of folks from the colleges here today. We do have, or will have joining us shortly, we have 3 of the commissioners. I wanted to make sure to have some commissioners here. They are appointed by the governor, but of course approved by the Senate, and they work very hard for the state. We do have Commissioner Megan Getz. She is from Laramie with us today. We have Commissioner Julia Newman from Torrington. If she's not here, she will be shortly. And then we also have Commissioner Greg Blickery from Gillette, and if he's not here yet, he will be shortly. I also wanted to introduce our college presidents who are with us today and representing their institutions. And then we also have some presidents. I still want to introduce them who are not here today because they have a various set of things going on. We do have Dr. Darren Devine. He's the president of Casper College, and he is also the president of the presidents, which means he spends an awful lot of time with me and with Ms. Taylor. And we have Dr. Kim Dale from Western Wyoming Community College. We have Dr. Brad Tyndall from Central Wyoming College. We have Dr. Joe Schaefer from Laramie County Community College. We should have, if he's not here yet, Dr. Walt Tribely from Northern Wyoming Community College District. I also wanted to mention that President Lisa Watson from Northwest College is traveling, could not be with us today. We have Dr. Janelle Oberlander, who's the president of Gillette Community College District, the interim president there. And she could not join us today for a family emergency. And then we have Dr. Rick Patterson. He is the interim president of Eastern Wyoming College. He is not here today, but I also wanted to take the time to introduce Dr. Jeff Hawes. He is not here today, but he will be the new president of Eastern Wyoming College starting July 1. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Taylor to introduce her trustees.
Good morning, members of the committee. I'm happy to be here. My name is Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. We are a 501c6 organization with our membership consisting of all of the trustees from the 8 community colleges. And so my board of directors is comprised of 2 trustees appointed by their boards to serve in this capacity. And our main role is really to speak for the voice of the trustees, advocacy. We do provide some role in terms of educating and giving them best practices, things like that. We do have some of our trustees here today, and I just wanted to say thank you for all of you who were able to join us last evening. It was just really nice to sit down and visit. So thank you for that. So I hope I have everyone in the room. They'll correct me if I've missed somebody, but we do have Kathy Dolan, Trustee Dolan, who is at Casper College, right here in Casper. From LCCC, we have Bob Salazar and Dawn Erickson. They're all there standing, good, thank you. And we have Trustee Reggie Clark from Western Wyoming Community College. And Reggie serves as the president of the WACD Board of Directors. Kathy Dolan is the vice president and Dawn Erickson is the treasurer. So we've got a good representation. I think there's some other trustees in town, and so they might show up later. But thank you for allowing us to be here today.
And Madam Chair, members of the committee, what I would like to recognize Dr. Joe Schaefer. You may not be aware, but Dr. Schaefer is the incoming president of the board for the American Association Community Colleges. So just a shout out for Dr. Schaefer for such an esteemed role and being the voice of not only his college and the Wyoming colleges, but he represents them across the country right now. So thank you for Dr. Schaefer and recognition for his important role there. Yes, yes. So I wanted to start just a little bit with the good news because there's some really great things that have been going on with the community colleges and frankly, higher education, including our partnership with the university, our very deep work with Department of Workforce Services and the Business Council and Department of Family Services. There's been some really exciting things along with the L. Bogan Foundation, as all of you really pursued the Wyoming's Tomorrow that passed in this session. So we wanted to share some of that information that's being passed out to you right now. I just wanted to start as you're all, let me just pause. Let me let you get it first. I'll just stop. Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee, it was important for us to really establish the building blocks. There's just a lot that goes on with the colleges. and a lot with our partners to serve the state of Wyoming. And I know you all know that, but really to bring forward some of the highlights that have occurred. The first thing that is on this page, and I wanted to put it front and center when Dr. Moritz, Mr. Swank, and Ms. Taylor and I were working on this, we want to make sure to keep in mind, while we bring up challenges and issues, there's just great work going on. And it was set in place by the legislature. And that's really important to recognize. There is a mission for the community college system in the state of Wyoming, and it was written in statute over time. And there are very specific states' interests that the legislature put in place in 2009 to say, and these are how they need to be carried out, and commission, you need to have that in your strategic plan. So we wanted to put those in front of you so that you know that's always in mind. The commissioners always have that in their documents for their commission meeting, and they have one next week. So the back page is a very, very condensed list of things that we wanted to make sure to put in front of you, because so many of these things are items that the legislature has either put into place or has supported in some way. I think one of the things that really happened was exciting last week, I think it was last week, is the Educational Attainment Executive Council, which was put in place by the legislature. It's first done by executive order. It was modified in how it would be structured, and that council did get put in place. And it sunset last week in a very successful way. And that's really important to bring to you, because the first line on this bullet is something for all of you to be proud of. It is great work that has been going on, that the educational attainment rate in the state of Wyoming is in fact going up. And it is going up statistically, not just that when number is going up, it is a verified and validated number. And that's really exciting. The other part of that I think is critically important is that adults in Wyoming with post-secondary credentials are on the rise. And that's important too, because those are the people who live in our communities already. And that's a really critical point. We wanted to bring that up. Graduation rates are on the rise. And we will have updates for you while the council is sunset. The requirement to update that plan is with the commission, and we'll do that. Representative Connolly has been a very active participant in that council, along with Senator Schuler, who has served for quite some time, and before that it was Senator Wasserberger. They were able to join our last meeting last week. I'm also pleased to say that the SLEDS, the Statewide Longitudinal Education Data System that was put in place by the legislature, is working. The final MOU was signed to put it in place. That was approved by the U.S. Department of Labor, and it is in place. And the next step is to have Department of Family Services join that. So that is our next step. It's very exciting. WYO transfer, otherwise known as the Common Transcript transfer process, is active, and the Common Course numbering system is up to date. And it was not. I'm just going to be very frank about that. And it is up to date thanks to this guy right here, Dr. Moritz, and the work of the Academic Affairs Council, a student transfer success group that included the university. I want to make sure that that's acknowledged. It's important. Building blocks. We are working on prior learning assessments. That's something that it is in the plan. I wanted to mention very quickly, because it is a part of your criteria, Joint Appropriations is going to talk about it on Thursday, and that is the Wyoming Innovations Partnership. I wanted to make sure it was listed on here. Phase 1 of that is actually going very well. Every single part of it is in implementation, and the process for hiring the executive director through the governor's office is in motion. That position description, Ms. Taylor, that's been approved and it's out, right? And we are excited about that position, and then planning for how we will pursue a truncated version of phase 2 is next on the agenda. So I wanted to share that. Another thing that came out of all of this combined work is the Boots website. And so if you get a chance to look at that, that is out of the governor's office as well. It was part of the NGA grant, which is the National Governors Association grant that we did. And I'm really proud of that because it takes career coach and skills match, and anybody can take a look at it and try to identify where they might be able to go. Another item that came out, and I don't know if you're all aware, is Department of Workforce Services has put together a way to find out how many people have a credential or a licensure in this state. And that was a big step in this last year so that we can truly see not only what happens at a post-secondary at the institutions, the colleges or the university, but what is an industry recognized credential that has a licensure in the state that leads to gainful employment. So they did that, kudos to them. Another item I wanted to share, and you may not realize it happened this quickly, but 3 colleges, we have 5 colleges that can offer a Bachelor's of Applied Science degree. 3 of those colleges awarded degrees this year. In the May commencement, there are a few more that are going to happen in the summer commencement. A total of 26 additional bachelor's degrees have been awarded in this state through the community colleges. And a very important component of that I wanted to share is 100% of those students said they would have not attended otherwise. It was this specific program at that college that met a local need. This was important because we absolutely want to make sure that the bachelor's degrees are not competing with the university. And all of the students said it did not. So that's important. That's a net add to our state. So kudos to the community colleges in that, and you will see many more coming forward from the colleges. The Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Program, that is in place. Thank you to the legislature for that. We are in fast and furious motion putting the rules together. I wanted you to be aware of that. We actually have our first meeting today. It's today, you should show up. It's today. And that is something we're being very intentional about. It was a commitment that we made. You put that into the legislation to have us do that with different partners. And our goal is to have the first draft set of rules by October so that in the February commission meeting, those can be adopted so that if the endowment is funded, we can award scholarships in that financing cycle of students for the fall semester. So we are working very diligently to do that. Thanks to Ms. Cindy Delancey, she has helped us get industry representatives for that group. We're seating just the last few members of that. We have 2 commissioners who are also on that rules writing team. We have a trustee, I believe it's Mr. Don Erickson, who is here with us today. So I wanted to give you an update on that because that's an exciting thing. And we had the good fortune of having the Elbogen Foundation at the Attainment Council meeting last week. I think you all are aware, if not, I'm going to tell you. The Elbogen Foundation funded a cohort at the community colleges that would fit the profile for the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship. And the results are outstanding. 149 students use that scholarship, and their results are impressive. Their GPA is higher, and their retention and persistence is almost 13% higher. It is incredible what that scholarship did for particularly families who needed financial aid. And that was very evident in that data. The report is public. I can give that to you. But what is really exciting is Mary Garland attended the Attainment Council meeting, and they have committed to another cohort at the community colleges for this fall. So again, to help bridge that, to see how long they can help support that until the endowment is funded. So some really great points. There is a little bit more in here. The Department of Family Services contacted us with some childcare grants. to promote activity in the workforce. And they have partnered with the community colleges to distribute those funds in their communities to knowing that'll impact the workforce. So great partnerships all across the way with some really outstanding outcomes. So I wanted to set the stage today. There's so much more that we could provide, but I just wanted to start it in a really good and positive way. And we're happy to answer any questions about that. Ms. Taylor was very active in helping us pursue this work. And then we'll get into the really exciting topic of the funding allocation model. Madam Chair?
Questions before we begin talking about funding? Seeing none, let's get to it.
Chairman. Madam Chairman.
I can't hear. Yep, Senator Scott, is that you?
Yes, Madam Chairman, if I may, one comment and one question. My comment is to the members of the committee, particularly the newer members. Some of this material that was just reported on sounds pretty dry and pretty dull. Things like the Common Course numbering system. My experience was in the first part of my service in the legislature, the most common complaint I got from constituents was my daughter's credits will transfer anywhere except the University of Wyoming. And that was a major problem. The Common Course numbering system and the other things with the university and the community colleges have been working cooperatively together, has solved that problem. And it has done, I think, our students and our citizens quite a bit of good. It's been very refreshing to see the university and the community colleges working together as partners, and that's a major improvement over the way things used to be. So it sounds kind of dry, but it's important. Madam Chairman, my question is for Dr. Caldwell. I recall seeing during the past year a rating that was prepared by a national group that rated the Wyoming Community College system as the best in the country. Is that memory correct? And what outfit was that?
Ms. Caldwell?
Madam Chair and Senator Scott, these are great points. So yes, that is from Wallet Hub. It is actually the ranking of the community college systems. Wyoming is number 2 in the country. We're waiting for that to come back to see if we can regain that number 1 spot. That is in fact true. And Wallet Hub is the basis of the U.S. News and World Report on the ranking in the Newsweek for higher ed systems. So it is a robust set of criteria that is used. Madam Chair and Senator Scott, I will further clarify what you said about the Common Course numbering system. When this legislature passed the Common Course numbering or the Common Transcript transfer process legislation, and Dr. Moritz came on board to start working with this student transfer success to put WYO transfer in place, Common Course numbering system was only at 38% accuracy and transfer. It is at 90%. It is substantial improvement in that. And the other 10% has a lot to do with courses that are specific and unique. And that's why, to their region, particularly at the community colleges or at the university where they would not come back to the colleges. So it is a vast improvement, as Senator Scott mentioned. It's accurate.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Caldwell, let's jump into your presentation.
Okay. I'll start on this one. Do this one. Madam Chair and members of the committee, we're going to go through some things fairly quickly, just as a baseline. A lot of this I think you've seen before, but we always just want to put the reminder in there. Of course, the commission, we're going to talk about the the structure of it. We're going to talk about the background and the funding. We're going to talk about the current funding system and where it is compared to how it was intended and established and where it actually lives. We're going to share a little bit of national perspective because we continue to hear some interesting points. And then we're going to talk about major maintenance and capital construction. And during that component of the major maintenance and capital construction, the commission did take action on an item to bring before you today. So I wanted to also put a pin in that when we get to that section of it. So just wanted to share that. So if we can go to the, I went too fast, didn't I? So the commission structure, really, when there became more than 2 community colleges, once there were 3, it was the legislature. It's provided for in the Constitution for the legislature to establish bodies. And they did that with the community college system and the Community College Commission. It is what's called an independent or separate state agency. So we have the commission that governs the commission, which is a coordinating body, and that is our lives. We coordinate across the colleges. The commissioners are appointed, approved by the Senate, the governor, and the state superintendent of public instruction serve as ex officio commission members. And I will pause right there and say, and they are active ex officio members of the commission. The governor's policy advisor almost always attends if the governor does not. And the same with the superintendent of public instruction and are included in all of our communications. The commission staff, there's only 12 of us, including me. So we're small and mighty, and it just shows all of the work that comes out of the commission, and there's a lot. I think, as you can see, we do heavily rely on the colleges to help with that work and other state agencies to help us. So the commission is an executive branch state agency created by the legislature to carry out all of the components that are identified in the statutes that you have written over time. And that's where all the data, the funding mechanism comes through. Whenever you have 2 or more colleges, when something of interest to the executive branch of the legislature, it comes through the commission because we can coordinate and make sure that that's happening and being reported in the same way. So that's a really important component for that. We make the budget request, we write the rules, and we coordinate across entities for those rules. I wanted to pause for just a moment and let Ms. Taylor talk a little bit about the Trustees Association. There's sometimes this confusion. We work very closely together. We know how it works closely together, but we just wanted to help share in that to help illustrate the differences, but how strongly that relationship and role is.
Thank you for that, Dr. Caldwell. Yes, I think, sometimes you're not in the weeds like we are representing the community colleges. And sometimes I get questions about, me working for the commission or what's the role of WACD versus the commission. And so we're just trying to do a better job of educating. And that's why we're all here and with one voice. And I think a lot of us know who have been doing this a long time, that wasn't always the case. You might hear a different message from the commission or WACD, but it hasn't been for the last probably 10 or so years that WACD's actually had an executive director. And so the role of my job is really to coordinate messaging and make sure we're all singing from the same songbook. And I think we've gotten a lot better at doing that. And so the trustees, I mentioned all of the two trustees from each college are on my board of directors. And then we also include the presidents in our policy making and in our process now. And that wasn't always the case. And so we have the president's viewpoint, we have the trustees, and then we coordinate that message. And we did that exactly yesterday with all of these voices, including the commission staff and the commissioners yesterday, just in a really good where have we been and where do we want to go sort of session. Which I think was really valuable. It'll just continue to give us a unified voice, which I think will help you understand how we all fit together.
Okay, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I just wanted to quickly hit this one, and then we're going to get more into the details of it. Again, I added the state's interests. The commission does establish, and they are required to establish priorities every biennium, and they have done that. They're going to look next week at probably modifying those. But they are to make sure that they're implementing what you've charged the commission and the colleges to do for the state of Wyoming under your 5 interests. And we wanted to share the mission of the commission as well. The commission exists because the colleges exist for the state of Wyoming. And that's to make sure that they're looking at community college education statewide on behalf of the state of Wyoming. So we are a coordinating body. We do have advocacy. It is specifically listed in our statutes and the ability to do that, and funding and accountability, which is why you see the volumes of data come through the commission. And we're a coordinating body, and that's very different from other locations where you have governance bodies. But what I want to mention here is this way we can coordinate across the colleges, but the colleges serve their local regions. So having governance closest to the people that is served is such an important role. Then when we can help share that message across the state, and certainly in collaboration with the Trustees Association for what that means to them at the local level. That's really important. So with that, I'll turn over the next legal responsibilities to Mr. Swank.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As you know, my name is Michael Swank. I'm in a new role, and obviously I've presented many times in front of the legislature, but in this role, it feels different. I'm going to just briefly go over kind of how our statute legal responsibilities are set up. So you'll hear the word coordinating all the time. We are a coordinating body. We coordinate for WIP. We coordinate all the different types of programs, special purpose funding, that sort of stuff. And that kind of permeates everything that the commission does. However, in statute, there are kind of specific sections where it says general functions, coordinating functions, administrative functions. But within all of that is usually a coordinating responsibility of the commission with other partners in the system. Whether it's the strategic planning, trying to kind of match things up from the bottom up with colleges and the system and educational attainment, that sort of thing. The funding and how funding is allocated to the colleges, special purpose funding for like Wyoming Investment in Nursing, Wyoming Works, those types of things. And then new program approvals, new program reviews, and then the reporting accountability. The commission is actually statutorily responsible for the statewide administrative computing system for all of the colleges. So it's has a obviously technology component to it. So that's kind of our responsibilities in a nutshell. I did forget to mention CapCon. That is an annual responsibility that we have, and that will be the latest recommendations will be provided to the commission next week. And then the bottom of this slide shows that we have a number of items within our budget. Obviously, the biggest part of that is the state aid budget, the unrestricted state aid budget, which includes, there's the unrestricted, there is a separate amount for health insurance, and then a separate amount for retirement contributions that are above the prior statutory threshold of 11.25%. And then there's, Veterans Tuition Waiver Program. We do carry the Wyoming Public Television budget in our budget, but the commission doesn't really oversee that program. It's separate, and we pass through that money to the Wyoming Public Television. Okay. This is just kind of a summary of when each college we have was established. I will note from the prior slide that Dr. Caldwell discussed, the commission was formed in 1951, but we already had 4 colleges that were established locally. So you have Casper, Northwest College in Powell, Eastern Wyoming College in Torrington, and Northern Wyoming Community College District, or also called Sheridan College, were all formed right after World War II. There was kind of it's on the presentation.
You fixed that.
Yes. And then the last college until last year was Laramie County Community College in 1968. So for more than 50 years, we were without a new college until last year when, if you recall, in 2020, the legislature passed a bill, or I should say 2021 session, passed a bill authorizing formation of Gillette College. The election was last year. They are now a full authorized district. And they, I think they're going, say again? Oh, sorry. I thought I heard something. The challenge with Gillette Community College District is that they are not an accredited college or institution yet. So the students within their purview do have a connection to Northern Wyoming Community College at the current time so that their credits and everything are accredited. The Gillette Community College is going through the accreditation process, and that could take a number of years, but I'll let Sandy expand on that.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee, they are actively working on that. It is a process, and the two college districts are actively working on their separation that was provided for in the legislation. And we have a regular update on that at our commission meetings. And so we put that in the packet. We make sure that it is public information so that as they proceed, they have an overarching MOU. They have then a series of exhibits that then come forward that provides for that separation. And that's important because that's part of their accreditation process. So we're still working on that. We just met with the U.S. Department of Ed, maybe a month ago with Dr. Oberlander on some of the components that are going to be necessary in that. So it's a process. It's probably going to take, I never want to hazard, I guess, to say, but in the next 3 years probably or so, depending on how that goes. I think that effort is going along, and we will keep it posted. Any update we can always provide to anyone as it's moving forward.
Just a quick question.
Representative Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sandy, out of that situation, while we have students sitting at Gillette Community College and they're graduating from there, are they receiving their diplomas still from the other community college district since they're the accredited, well, I should go back to college, accredited district? Is that what's happening right now? And then they will eventually switch over to their own district? Is that right?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chairman, Representative Brown, yes. So they are students of Northern Wyoming Community College District. That's where their credits are from. That is where their certificates or degrees will be from until Gillette Community College District becomes an accredited college. And usually there's an in-between step. I'll just let everybody know. Once they're in candidacy and they can get what is called their Office of Post-Secondary Education ID number, they have to have that before they can be considered that. So even their website has to be a .com. They're actually under Northern's website. So their email is even .com until they're eligible for that OPE ID number. Okay, the next thing that we wanted to show you is hopefully the last time you see this map. We are awaiting a new, actually two maps that we're waiting on right now. This outlines the community college districts. Gillette Community College and their service areas. So there is the county in which that is coterminous with the college district, and then their respective service areas that they have. Gillette Community College District is still in the Northern Community College District service area that allows for them to be working very directly with Northern to make sure those students are awarded. We have new maps that are coming. They're going to be refreshed, a little bit updated color scheme. And then we're going to have a series of two, one that reflects that Gillette is within the service area, but a separate district. And then once they are accredited, then it'll show Campbell County as the county where Gillette Community College District is coterminous. So be expecting that. We're waiting on it literally today. It's the first thing I asked Michael this morning is did we get the maps in? They'll be on the commission packet next week. And we're happy that we can provide some new map for them.
I think Representative Summers and then Representative Connolly have questions.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Just a question on service areas. When were they designated and who designated them?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Summers, I would have to go back and look. I believe that was in Do you remember from your white paper?
I think it's from the 90s.
In 1999?
I think it was after the 90 audit.
It was after the 1990 management audit on that. So that it really took what was already happening and then put that in statute at that time. And we have a process for that to be changed. There's an entire rules process should a county ever want to make that change. It's complicated because of the awarding of credits, as you heard Representative Brown just talk about, in the degrees and programs that students are in. But that was set up at that time, and there is a process for that to be changed. It has to go before the commission.
Okay, Representative Connolly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Caldwell, while there are these service areas, not all counties within service areas contribute to the funding for that service area, is my understanding. Could you quickly go over which counties are paying for their community colleges and which ones aren't?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, yes, and Mr. Swank has more detail around that when we get into the presentation. But it would be the 8 counties, and I will mention very quickly, Gillette Community College District, their budget is up for adoption in June rather than the traditional July, so that they can move forward on their budget plans and assess their local mills and however they're planning to do that with their budget. So I believe that meeting is on June 15th. So that would be Park County, Fremont County, Sweetwater County, Natrona County, Sheridan County, Goshen County, Laramie County, and soon to be Campbell County.
Just to clarify, those are the only counties that are paying? The remainder of the counties are not paying to support their community colleges?
Madam Chair,
Caldwell.
Madam Chair and Representative Connolly, that is correct. Those counties by statute can assess up to the 4 mills and the optional 5th mill. The other counties do not pay a mill. The students still participate, paying tuition and fees like any other student would do. And there are some various supports through the BOCES or the college outreach offices, and that varies depending on the location in the state, the resources.
Suspect that was a question you knew the answer to. Please continue.
More to come, Madam Chair. And so if I may, we're switching to the actual college funding. And I'm just going to give a quick update, and then, because that's the part I really can do, and then Michael's going to get deep into the weeds. So I think this is a lot of what you all are aware of. We went through it pretty much in detail last September, talking about the college budget. The state aid budget is set on a traditional standard budget development each biennium. It is a part of the commission budget request. It is part of our standard, and we have to carefully construct anything where we put in an exception request. There is a recalibration period that occurs. It's a 4-year period that was designed to help provide somewhat stability. And it was intended to really focus on the fixed costs and variable costs. Mr. Swank's going to get in great detail for you. It really began in the 2004-5 period, and then it rolls forward every 4 years based on that. And it's called the recalibration of the base period. And we just had the recalibration of the base period that occurred. And part of that was due to the uncertainty of it. I think it's going to make a little bit more sense as Mr. Swank goes through it. So if we'll switch to the next one. I think I'm on this one, but I think you should do it.
Okay. Madam Chair, so the way the presentation set out, we kind of go through some broad, kind of high-level perspective of where funding comes from, that sort of thing. And then we get into the weeds of the actual funding allocation model and some of the details of that. So this kind of begins that discussion. The college system is meant to kind of have three separate areas of funding. You would have your state level funding, your local mill or property tax funding, and then tuition and fees. Retirement terms, your 3-legged stool, so to speak. The way our system works, and each state is fairly specific and has differences in how they decided to fund their community or local colleges. Ours was set up to generally have a historic design of 60% state, 20% tuition, and 20% local mill. That was mostly achieved up through about 10 years ago. And then since then, various rounds of budget cuts, inflationary factors, those types of things have sort of started to bias that more toward the local and tuition sides of the funding model or the funding distribution. So as we show here, right now it's getting closer to a 50% share of state, and then a combination of the local mills and the tuition and fees vary between 20 and 25%, that sort of thing. In fiscal year 2022, it was at about 55%, just under 20% for local revenue, and then tuition and fees were about 26%. The other factor that you need to think about as we go through this is that while the state's on a biennial budget, the colleges are on annual budgets. So when we get a biennial appropriation, we have to allocate it annually to them. So that's where the funding allocation model comes in, and we'll discuss that in a little bit.
Let me add something. Let me interrupt you, Michael. One thing that we wanted to make sure that we mentioned here is that not only has the percentage really moved away from the 60-20-20, closer to this 55-18 and 26-27%, a higher proportion of that going cost share going to the students. It's also in a contracting system. And that's an important thing to note, is that through the experiences that we've seen, not only has the proportion shift, but the contracting of it, so that they're having to really focus more narrowly on what they're able to do and what they're able to offer. And that is an important point to make, because the colleges are very nimble. And I think there's a pretty broad awareness of that, but it takes resources and things like Wyoming Works, that is the programmatic funding, while a small amount, helps them make that nimble in the change there. So it is something to be aware of. The other thing that happened in the way, for example, recalibration works, it assumes that the value of a dollar never changes. There is no external cost adjustment. There is no recognition that water, sewer, insurance, and those things increase in cost. That's not provided in any way for there. So it just assumes that the value of a dollar is the same as it was in 2010, which is where the last real change was on increasing costs due to things costing more. So that's a really important point for us to make. And we brought that up before. It just made an important point to make right now. The colleges do have an option. Ms. Taylor, do you want to talk about the additional 5 mills?
I can, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I apologize, I'm a little stuffy today, so I'm going to do the best that I can. The colleges, it was already mentioned, the colleges impose 4 mills, and that's what they have to impose in order to receive state aid. The Board of Trustees then has the option to impose an additional 5th mill, and all of the 7 community colleges, Gillette College aside, impose that 5th mill levy. In statute, there is an ability to impose up to an additional 5 mills by election. It's something that we don't see happen very often. It does have to have a specific purpose attached to it. And sometimes you might see something like that happen. I think the most recent example was at LCCC, right? And LCCC doesn't have a BOCES that every other county has. So there are kind of different circumstances as to how and why that option might be utilized.
Senator Rothfuss?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I had a question on the slide that we have with regard to historical design of the 60-20-20. That seems to imply that that's the way it's always been. How long does that 60-20-20, I know that's been effectively our philosophy for more than 10 years now, but dating much further back, that wasn't really what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be kind of a lower portion of state and more of the local share, when did it, I mean, really from a historical design standpoint, when did we really start shifting to this 60-20-20 versus the maybe third more concept? I don't know exactly what it was before.
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, it's actually been from a long time, and Mr. Swank is going to get into a little bit of, I think, what you're probably getting at. So when you look back at it was the 1990 management audit, and then the 1999 governance study got into why that occurred in that way. So it's been a very long time, and it has to do with what actually functions. And so Mr. Swank actually, during the select committee work that went on, the select committee on community college funding, pulled together a white paper that actually goes through it in detail for what it has. But there's actually a long history of that in the state. I think maybe what you are mentioning, and Mr. Swank is going to get to momentarily, is this notion of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That was not a unique Wyoming design, and that's even in that documentation. It was sort of an ideal a long time ago, and it is not functional anywhere at all in the US because it does not adequately support. So what would happen is costs for students would go extremely high, and the colleges would have to contract even further unless there's some other mechanism created for that. So it's been a very long time. We can get you the 1990 management audit, we can get you the 99 governance study, and this fabulous white paper created by this man right here that really goes into quite detail about that and why the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 never was functional or pragmatic. And actually, the Education Commission of the States did a presentation to the select committee along with Witchy on that very topic and why it structurally doesn't work.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Swank?
Dr. Caldwell is correct. So obviously, the community colleges in Wyoming started before the commission was formed and kind of started before an overarching state interest was established for them. So I believe right around sometime during the 1980s, there's been, I think, 4 or 5 different audits or special committees and so forth for the colleges. The state started to recognize the colleges more, instead of separate institutions, as more of a body, and started to bring in funding and kind of an administrative structure. In the 1990 management audit, which was a contracted audit, not an audit by LSO staff, they kind of set out expectations for what the state's interests should be going forward. And out of that comes the omnibus, I think, I can't remember, it's the Omnibus Act, I can't remember if it has a longer name. And that started, down, establishing the mission, establishing the priorities, that sort of thing. And right between about mid-80s to the mid-90s is when a 60% kind of threshold was started to become understood. I don't know that it has ever been explicitly stated as such, but it has been kind of a tradition of keeping the state's interest involved in community college funding and administration, but also recognizing the independence and value of the community colleges at the local level, which is why we're more of a coordinating commission and not, some sort of more, top-down administrative structure.
So, Madam Chairman, just to clarify,
Follow-up?
sounds like 60-20-20 was mid-80s was what it sounds like was really when that philosophy started to take hold and develop. Okay, thank you.
And then Representative Summers, did you have a question?
Madam Chairman, thank you. This goes to the mill thing. So one was the fifth mill, was that an optional one? In other words, could that commission then adopt that fifth mill? How was the fifth mill brought on? And then I got a series of questions. So the 4 mills, would it be better if you had more autonomy that it doesn't have to be special purpose, for example? Could you go out that it could be just for the general appropriation of that, of that the trustees? So that's one question. And are we going to get into if this is all going to be later, if we're going to have a whole section on the mill, on the mill levy, then we can talk about it there. You know, and then the other question would be if the fifth penny was like or the fifth mill was like by adoption of the trustees, you know, is that something that we should consider for the 4 mills? In other words, to put in statute that, you know, because they're elected, right? I don't live in one of those counties, but I assume that they are an elected body. So if we push that down to a local elected body to make that decision, is that something that's of interest?
Dr. Caldwell or Mr. Swank, I'd say if the mill discussion is going to happen later on in your presentation, let's save that for later. But if not, then let's address it now.
Madam Chair, Representative Summers, yes, we are going to get into a little bit more detail around that, so I think we can answer it at that point. I've jotted down each of those questions to make sure that we respond to each one of these, because these are very important questions that we spend our lives talking about. So we will make sure to cover that in that section when we get to that. That work.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this slide is kind of a condensed version of something you saw last September. It just kind of gives you the snapshot of where the shares of funding occur within the system. So we have fiscal year 2010, sorry. And that's kind of the base year that we typically use in recent years, simply because, as Dr. Caldwell mentioned, that was kind of the last time the legislature addressed a more comprehensive approach to, or comprehensive funding for the colleges with a fixed cost adjustment, that sort of thing. Since then, we've had incremental changes, budget cuts, that sort of thing, that have steadily eroded the value of that funding over the last 10 or 12 years. So we have fiscal year 2010. It shows that even then, I think that was also the first year we had some significant budget cuts under the 2 governors ago. And it shows that even then, I think this is the budget estimate, actually, this wasn't actually the budget expenditures, was less than 60%. It had just started kind of eroding down from there. And then it is roughly, it's similar in fiscal year 2021. There is a little bit of a decrease in proportion of state aid. And then, as you can see there, the amount of state aid has overall has increased slightly. However, one of the things I did want to point out, the value of the dollar, the Wyoming Cost of Living Index has changed 32% since 2010. So if you look at the second quarter from 2010 to 21, it's basically a 32% or a third decrease in the value. So that 187 million is not necessarily that value when you compare it to 2010. Those are all kind of constant dollars, not inflation adjusted dollars.
One thing that we did, Madam Chair, members of the committee, was break down the local revenue. We talked mostly about the mills, but there's really, the local revenue is comprised of 2 parts. That's the mills, and then a small proportion of the motor vehicle tax. So I knew that was that always comes up. So we make sure to break those out for you to see the components of the local revenue that comes into the colleges. It's the lion's share for sure is related to the 4 mills.
Madam Chair, the next 3 slides are kind of getting into funding sources and kind of the trends that Wyoming has seen in the last 10 or 15 years. So the first one we have here is the tuition history. The commission sets tuition statewide for all the colleges. It's not done by college. Colleges are allowed to set their course fees and their administrative fees. The commission does not do that for them. But on this slide, it shows that the tuition for Wyoming resident, non-resident, and WUI participants, and his base, all of them have been proportionally increased by about 98% since the academic year of 2004. In kind of our own research, that has been roughly equivalent to a national trend in terms of increasing tuition, with a little bit of variance, but not too much.
One question that came up before that we always want to make sure that we mention is that that increase in tuition is on par nationally. We were fairly low to begin with. I mean, that is something to acknowledge, but we are above the average for WICHE now when you remove California out of that mix, which is what they do as well. So it is a little bit sobering to see that we were really the most affordable community colleges in the Wenatchee region, and now we're above the average.
And Ms. Caldwell, what does WUE stand for on the red line?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Oh, WUI, apologies, we should have said that. That's the that's the Western Universal or University Course Exchange. So we have a partnership with the states where they don't have to pay out-of-state tuition. They pay 1.5 times. So it allows for adjacency in states, and that's important, particularly where you have some specialized programs or students who live maybe in an adjacent state. It's actually closer to go to the colleges or university in that region. It's a good recruiting tool for the state of Wyoming, frankly.
Okay, let's keep going.
I do
Ms.
wanna-
Representative Summers has a question.
Madam Chairman, just a follow-up. So what states belong to that, and why is Nebraska separate?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Summers, we'll get that list for you. It's really the Rocky Mountain and the West states. So we also include actually Nebraska, which not all of the other witchy states do, but we do. So it's Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, Arizona, all of those states, California, Washington, and Oregon, and Idaho. I think I got them all, and we had Nebraska. It's almost all the witchy states, yeah, almost all.
All right.
So it's slight variation.
Let's keep going.
Oh, I thought I saw a raised hand over here.
One thing I want to mention about tuition, because I think this is important. We had a tuition conversation yesterday in Ms. Taylor's wacky brainstorming session, and it's a really important topic. The commission was under a lot of pressure to raise tuition over the last several years because we were below. How are we helping to offset those costs for the state? And you see it has shifted quite a lot of burden to the students, and frankly, many of the community college students are those who are most in need. So it's a challenging dynamic. I will mention that the colleges all 7 of our colleges did receive notice that from the College Accountability and Transparency Act that it's pacing fast. And we had to respond to that and support the colleges in that response, that tuition had gone up because the commission had increased that tuition. So that's going to weigh very heavily on the commissioner's mind when they have to look at tuition. They certainly don't want to put the colleges in a position where they are seen as raising tuition too quickly. And because they don't do that, the commission does that. And they do it very thoughtfully. They have an entire tuition policy that factors in how that is to be considered, what that proportion is. It's a framework, but at the same time, the pace of that tuition increase does impact students and their affordability and ability to attend. So I'd be remiss if I did not mention that. Don't know what the commissioners will do in October, but I know that the fact that the colleges did receive notice and we did, as a commission, have to provide responses for the colleges is going to weigh heavily on their minds in terms of raising tuition yet again. Just wanted to mention that.
Madam Chair.
Representative Connolly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got some more questions about tuition. I actually don't know the answers to all of these. I am curious if the tuition is constant among and between each of the community colleges. Honestly, I'm pulling up the community colleges' most recent websites and seeing tuition that's higher. Some tuitions that are closer to 145, where the graph has 105. Is that fees? And so always looking at fees it makes it a bit more complicated. And then my last question is, what's the tuition in relation to UW's tuition per credit hour?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, I think what you are seeing is the combined tuition and fees. All of the colleges do have the same tuition rate, and it is in their catalog listed that way. So I think what you're seeing is probably the bundling of that. We look on each one of the sites, and we know that they do have it listed. They have to break out those, so it is available to them. It is the trustees who set the fees, and there is definitely a distinction between what is a required fee and what is an institutional required fee. versus what is a course fee, and those are ones that we don't include in that. Because those are for consumable. Course fees are for consumables. Metal for welding, for example, that kind of thing, versus an institutional fee, which might be a technology fee to help support the online environment that the colleges have. We do track the University of Wyoming tuition, and that is, do you know it off the top of yours, 161? Oh, I got it. Yeah, it's 160, and they do have a scheme for the 4% increase over time based on their tuition study. That is a consideration and factor for the commission when they look at tuition.
Madam Chair, the only thing I wanted to add on this one is that for these slides showing the trends, one of the reasons why we're showing these items, so like tuition rather than tuition and fees, these are items that are considered when we start doing or start going through like the funding allocation model. So the funding allocation model doesn't address every type of revenue that a college receives. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Representative Brown?
As I'm looking at this particular slide, and then I think about your guys' split on what the actualities are with tuition making more of a portion, I'm just curious if maybe you guys can provide the committee with a breakdown of not only where these tuition rates are at, but also the breakdown of how many students that you guys have that are out of state on the WUI program and also in state. That way we can kind of see what that breakdown is actually causing. That might be helpful for us as well.
Doctor?
Madam Chair and Representative Brown, we have that available. I mean, that's in part of our tuition report, our enrollment report. So we do have that information. We'll get that for the committee.
Okay, committee members and panelists, it's 9:30 and we are on slide 14, and I think you've got about 40 slides, so just want to throw that out there.
Madam Chair, this slide is the local 4 mil property tax levy by college district. So this would show of the current colleges that assess of the 4 mil. Gillette College will start assessing their mill for fiscal year 2023, but again, they haven't gotten to the 4 mil yet. So this is all retrospective, starting in 2005 to 2001 or 21. What I did want to note is that when we get to Representative Summers' questions, so each college, basically every college until Gillette, they assess their 4 mills, and that was to get state aid. So they have that. That is kind of part of their unrestricted funding at the local level. Their one optional mill that is voted on by their board of trustees can also be used for, it's not, I don't believe it's special purpose completely, but it is for the use of the college's operations. But since it is an elected mill by the board, we do not include it when we consider their funding levels for the funding allocation model of state aid. The optional 5 mills, my understanding is that each district has to put a mill before the electors and have a special purpose for it, and that has to be renewed every 4 years. So they're allowed to have it for 4 years before they have to go back before the electors again. Currently I believe only Laramie County Community College has that particular mill. Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, just to add to that and to get to Representative Summers' questions, the last few years when we've been talking about how to bring more sustainability and stability to the funding for the community colleges, those sorts of toggles, if you will, have come up. Maybe it would be an idea to allow the trustees to impose 2 additional mills. Maybe it would be worthwhile to consider extending that 4 years to maybe 6 or 8 years. Because, until you get the lag in property tax revenues, by the time you get that going, it's nearly time to ramp up again to educate your community, things like that. So those are some things that we've thought about, and they could be helpful.
Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think one of the concerns with those ideas specifically, which has been a challenge all along, is when you look at slide 14 and the inequities in what 4 mills will get you. that then becomes a solution, these extra 5 mils, for example, and any switches that we provide that are optional, become a solution for some districts. Our new district in particular is going to be able to, put on a 1/10 of a mill or something like that and build a palace. But when you look at Eastern as an example, an additional 4 mills is not going to probably build them a new building for 4 years. So it works for some, doesn't work for others, which has always been, I think, a theme in in our funding.
And Madam Chairman, if I might respond to that, Senator Rothfuss, we'll talk a little bit more about how then, the college, that district keeps those mills. So another college might be more reliant on that state aid. We'll talk about why we're different and how it is different than K-12 in that respect as well. But you're right, and those are things that we've talked about as well. It's not the solution. Could it be helpful? Yes. Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Let's continue.
Madam Chair, the other thing that I would add to this is you can see from the graph that Mr. Swank put together is the volatility over time. And that's also one of the challenges when they're trying to make sure that they have functional operational budgets. And the local revenue is having to make up a higher percentage, then it creates more volatility on them being able to manage their budgets over time. So it is just an important component to recognize the inherent volatility that comes with that.
Madam Chair, the next section I just wanted to briefly touch on. When we start looking into how the Community College Commission allocates state aid, one of the components is the levels of instruction. So we have to use data related to enrolled credit hours, completed credit hours, and completed degrees and certificates as part of our funding allocation. When they start weighting the enrollment hours, you get into these levels of instruction. Each type of class has a different level or different weighting to it and how it's applied within the funding allocation model, as well as recalibration of our base period every 4 years. So prior to what we refer to as House Bill 80 in 2016, that was kind of the last change that we've had for related to community college funding, not necessarily the obtaining state aid, but how we allocate state aid. There were 3 general weights to credit hours. There was your basic lecture, at the school brick and mortar class. There was your lecture and lab classes, and then there was your high tech, more like high consumable, high tech courses related to labs or technical degrees, that sort of thing. After House Bill 80 actually implemented a 4th level of instruction, and these are all now in statute. The 2 of the lecture lab and the higher tech, high delivery equipment cost classes were reduced, and then they added a online or distance education level of instruction at less than a full credit hour. It was counted, it's weighted at less than a full credit hour. The levels of instruction do differentiate between the types of and expense, the cost that you have per credit and per class. Right now, there is some concern that they don't necessarily reflect the true cost of those classes. So take, for example, level of instruction for distance learning. On its surface, it may seem like it's a less expensive class. However, you're not only having the teacher to prep for that class, but you're also, in some cases, having to, say, send lab materials out for that class, or the technology to maintain, to keep that class online, it can be costly. So the treating it as kind of less than a traditional class, when in fact it's a traditional class in a different environment, has been expressed. It's been concern expressed to us and how those weights impact the funding allocation model.
Madam Chair, a good example of that would be a lab class, for example. Maybe there's a biology class that's being conducted online, and that would be, the House Bill 80 did contract the levels of instruction. It compressed them closer together. But then also when you have something like the lecture lab and it's a 1.25 and the college goes to offer that online, Maybe they have a really large service area, as in Eastern's case or Western's case. And they have to then also make sure that they're sending out materials and that the students have everything that they need for that class. But instead of being a 1.25 being offered on campus, it gets a 0.8 for that course being offered, which does not reflect the fact that it is a lab lecture class and an online class in those components. So Dr. Moritz actually has some very specific examples for you on online, and why many times it's thought that it's going to be less expensive actually is the opposite. It is more. And if I may, I'd like to let Dr. Moritz share some of those with you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you. To start, what Dr. Caldwell just mentioned is a key piece. The differing LOI multipliers are 1.25, and 1.5 for a lecture course, a lab course, and then a CTE course. And those numbers all reflect the need for additional costs in the classroom. But then when you have the LOI for distance education of 0.8, that trumps any other multiplier. So if you have, like you mentioned, a chemistry course that has a multiplier of 1.25 because you have lab supplies, you have equipment, things like that, and then you do offer that online, rather than having an additional 0.25 to account for those supplies, the colleges instead have a 20% discount on the funds that they receive, a reduction. But those lab supplies are still necessary. They're mailed out in many cases. Another important item to discuss is when this was initially passed, there was some discussion about the differing sizes of classes, with the assumption that if you have an online course, you could have 100 people, you could have 200 people. So having a multiplier that down to 0.8 made up for the fact that there was more efficiency there. But in fact, there are caps across all of the colleges on course size, even for online courses, that are in most cases around 30. And in no cases are those online courses much bigger than that. And there are multiple reasons for that. It's not a lack of desire for efficiency at the colleges. Rather, instructors who are teaching online classes, and for any of you up there who have ever taught an online class, you probably know this, the workload is the same, or in many cases more, than having an in-class section. You still have to prepare all of the materials, but then you have to also make sure and get them online. And then when students have questions, you're in the chat room, you're on the phone, you're sending emails, whereas a lot of the discussion that happens in a classroom takes place right there in the classroom. So you teach the class and you go home, and there's less follow-up material. So because of that, the class size is capped. So you don't really have that, you can't fit 60 people into an online class and regain some of those. And then as a final point, there are still the generalized costs for student affairs and student support, such as course development costs, tutoring, advising. All of those remain the same for an online class or for an in-person class. But for an online class, you have additional costs for online tutoring. Many of the colleges have subscriptions through NetTutor, for example, to provide that. And then you also have plagiarism checkers. You have your LMS, which is your learning management system, which is many times based on usage. So the more people you put through that, the more costs you have there. So I could go into more detail, but I think that should be sufficient for now, but happy to follow up.
Senator Rothfuss?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And as we're kind of talking about this weighting, it doesn't seem like it's a very thoughtful system where you'll always be able to come up with significant counterexamples, because it doesn't really look at what is real on the ground and then translate what is real into any type of number. I mean, the contrary example could also be true. You could run a very simple, we'll say, Algebra 1 class where I can scale it to 100 asynchronously as the professor. There aren't a lot of classes that I could easily scale to 100, but if I had A, B, C, and D, answers, grading could be easier, and maybe I can scale that up easier with a grad student. The key idea being the scaling is not necessarily linear. The first student in a class is an incredibly expensive student because you need a professor, you need all of the resources and all of the support for the class to exist. And then it scales with student beyond that point to a certain degree, and then maybe it changes that scaling. Do other states have different systems? Do other systems have different systems that are more sensitive to a realistic, this class costs a particular amount to offer, this other class costs a different amount to offer, and with variables like number of students, does it have a lab, which would be a plus instead of a multiplier perhaps? Are those concepts more able to be realized for an appropriately weighted course? And again, not all labs are equal either. You can have a lab class that's relatively low cost and it's still a lab class. You can have one that's a wet biology lab where every experiment costs $10 a kid a time. Big differences. So any other way to look at that?
Dr. Caldwell and Mr. Moritz?
I'll take a stab at it. Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, one thing I will mention is there's a lot of detail that goes into a course qualifying for one of these levels of instructions, and that is one of the changes that was made. It isn't just the prefix, it's down to the course level to make sure that they were better aligned with what truly was occurring at that class level. What you're talking about is two slightly different things. You have the break-even analysis on a particular institution, and when does that course actually break even and pay for itself? The other question that you're asking is, and yes, that the institutions do that, but it also varies by a lot of factors. So it's not a simple thing. Many states do use what very similar structure to what we do. I don't know of any that create such a reduction in online. Most of them, it's an additive for any of them for more than one reason. One, it recognize the cost, and two, to make sure that they're not disincentivizing, particularly community colleges with large service areas, access to students in particularly remote areas. So having some sort of structure that recognizes the difference between a general lecture-based class, a lecture lab, and then a high-cost, low-enrollment class. There are variations on that. They're not that dissimilar from ours. Notable exception is the contraction that we created when there was given less recognition of the differences in costs, and then certainly the difference in the online. And you will definitely see a difference between what occurs in community colleges than what you would see in a university. It's a very different structures, particularly when you're adding lab-based upper division courses, you have graduate schools and that kind of thing. So it then begins to change very differently on what that looks like. Do you have anything to add to that?
Representative Brown, and then feel free to add on.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just kind of curious. This was the year right before I came in to the legislature. So 2016, I went and pulled the bill. And I'm just curious if maybe you can explain to, in a very brief, I understand that we're waiting here, but House Bill 80 seems to be a complete revamp of how the community college system was funded in general. And I was just speaking with Representative Harshman. It sounds like at the time we had a good growing community college, population, and then 2017 we immediately came in with $380 million that we had to cut. So I'm just kind of curious what the premise was behind House Bill 80, why that was put in, and maybe get a little bit of background, because this, as I'm looking at this, I see the damage that has occurred, but I'm also trying to understand the why behind what happened.
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Brown, I'll start this and then I'll turn it over to Michael to give a little bit more detail. We are pointing out issues with House Bill 80. I want to make sure to also clarify that there's some really good things about House Bill 80. And I don't want that to be missed in all of this. There was not good stability for the colleges to plan their budgets because it was so unpredictable from biennium to biennium. So this at least gave some ability for planning purposes. if things are going to change so drastically, it was very hard for an institution to front funds to put something forward that's a high-cost program, potentially low enrollment, and be able to sustain it without knowing what was going to happen. So House Bill 80 did help in providing some predictability around it to know what was going to happen in recalibration. But it didn't contemplate what was going to happen when there were budget cuts, and it did not contemplate an ECA. And those are really big components. One other thing that you're going to hear from Mr. Swank is that it also only looks at FTE and not a combination of Fte and head count. And we see that as an issue because the colleges serve a lot of adult students who do have to attend part-time. And it takes, whether a student is going full-time or part-time, in terms of admissions, processing, financial aid, it doesn't matter how many credits they're taking. They still have to work with those students, advisement, all of those types of things. So those are some of the downfalls in House Bill 80, but I don't want to indicate in any way that House Bill 80 overall is a bad thing. It does give predictability, and that's an important thing.
Madam Chair, Representative Brown. I was about to use the first name. Representative Brown. Dr. Caldwell's kind of covered the basics. So one of the challenges with community college funding, and this is kind of going back to, I think, one of our earlier slides that talked about basically between 2004 and House Bill 80 in 2016, there was I guess what we call Blue Ribbon Task Force in 2007 through 2009. And during that time, it was acknowledged that the way state funding was allocated and discussed didn't get to differentiations of cost, differentiations of levels of instruction, all those types of things. So over time, that was started to be addressed. So in between about 2009 and 2016, they started differentiating fixed and variable costs. And then with House Bill 80, it started to bring in levels of instruction and kind of more defining it in a remote learning environment that's gradually been increasing. So like Dr. Caldwell said, House Bill 80 tried to address some of that. And when we do like the recalibration, that's kind of one of the big deals, I guess, about House Bill 80 is so that there is a distinct 4-year guaranteed way for the commission and the colleges to know that at least their variable costs will be somewhat addressed within the standard budget. And that's what they call recalibration. But even though student enrollment, that sort of thing, are significantly impact variable costs because you have to have instructors, that sort of thing. You have to be able to scale classes up or down. You still need to have a bare minimum of staff. So not all costs that are reflected in a course are variable. They're also fixed. And when we get into the next couple of slides, you'll see kind of how in our rules, we've differentiated between what part of instruction is fixed and what part of instruction is variable. I'm not sure this is getting directly to your answer about whether House Bill 80 was kind of a good or bad thing. I'm not sure that was the intent, but what it did was it kind of started us down this path of trying to be more precise on how costs and instruction were taken into account, both within recalibration and how we use them in the funding model, the funding allocation model.
All right, let's continue. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So before we keep on going, and I want to go back to the LOIs and talk about one area of community college credits that I'm not seeing in the presentation. And those are the credits that are taken by high school students. And the reality is ultimately, you're going to ask us, and I think we're going to agree, that we take a good look at the funding for the community colleges statewide. So we need to understand all of the components of community college credit offerings. And a significant one, again, are the credits taken by high school students. And they can take them in two different ways, dual and concurrent, right? Dual is at the community colleges themselves, but it could also be a class at a community college that is online asynchronous that a high school student is literally taking in the high school. But then there's also concurrent classes, which are literally in the high school themselves. And we don't see any kind of discussion of those classes, of those credits. And honestly, the state paying for them because we pay for high school students taking those classes. So I think we need to get an understanding of those credit hours and the money that flows from the state for the paying for them.
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair and Representative Connolly, we do have that information. We do what is called the POP report, which is the post-secondary education report around dual and concurrent. We'll get that for you. There's some complications around that, and you're right. There's this distinction between dual and concurrent and where it is taught and who is teaching it and the costs that are incurred with that. One of the things to note is that the high school students don't pay. And so there is support and help from some of the BOCES. Some BOCES literally don't have revenue to cover that kind of thing. Some of our colleges, at least one of our colleges, LCCC, does not even have a BOCES to help with that. So that is an issue because of the tuition revenue for the colleges. I do want to point out, though, that when you're talking about a concurrent course, a concurrent course that is taught at the high school with a high school teacher who has been, who is an adjunct faculty for the community college to teach that course at the high school. There are still costs for the colleges, and that's an important thing to note because sometimes that gets lost. And that has to do with the fixed costs that Mr. Swank is talking about. They're not removed. And in fact, the colleges are required by their accrediting body, the Higher Learning Commission, to ensure that they provide the same services to that student at the high school as they do to any other student wherever they might be taking that course. So they do have those costs, but we do have that information and we'll get that for you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a follow-up, and I think it will be really important for us going forward to really understand those numbers, credit hours and dual and concurrent money that's flowing to the school districts for those classes through BOCES, because again, ultimately you want us to think about a more sustainable funding structure for you. So we need to understand how to do that best.
Mr. Moritz, do you want to respond?
Yes, Madam Chair, and if I could add just a little bit more. The POP rules or legislation requires that the high schools all offer at least 12 credits of dual and concurrent enrollment, and they work with their local community colleges to do so. The BOCES and the BOCHES, when possible, supplement some of those costs, but in many instances, the colleges for the dual enrollment are simply scholarshiping those students. And so only the fees are charged, and those fees are sometimes covered by BOCES simply because BOCES would not be able to afford covering the total amount. So the requirement in statute is somewhat of an unfunded mandate where the colleges and the high school, they work that out. And then for the concurrent enrollment, in most cases, it's a paper exchange. So the cost for hiring the adjunct is seen to equal the cost for tuition for those students who are in that class. So in almost every example, possibly every example, I'd have to check, the college is not receiving any funds for the concurrent enrollment, but they are responsible for the fixed costs, the student service costs that are involved. That's not to say that the colleges don't recognize that this is a very valuable piece of the educational system, and there's all sorts of data that shows that students who take dual and concurrent enrollment are more likely to complete, they're more likely to get a certificate or a degree, and it's in the best interest. It really does serve the workforce needs of the state. However, the funding piece has always been somewhat problematic.
Representative Summers?
Madam Chairman, thank you. Just on that, so as we look at that 50, 25, 25, whatever, whatever piece this is of that, right? It'd be good to know, is this 1%? Is this 2%? Is this 10%? So just to understand, what that is, it would be a good idea.
Representative Harshman?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I think also if you could include in that information that Representative Summers has asked, just kind of the head counts too in each of those districts. How, I mean, because that, you get to count those students in your head count, correct? I mean, that's, so it's not like it's total, not any funding at all. I mean, you get to count them as your students, correct? Is that?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Harshman, yes, but I'm going to put a caveat on that. FTE. So they don't get the individual head count.
Very
It
good,
is
yeah.
based on the
They
FTE.
contribute to your FTE.
And that is one of the challenges, because then they have to process them regardless of how many they take. We have those numbers. We'll get that for you. It's in the POP report.
Okay.
Madam Chairman.
Oh, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, as I look at this, the results of House Bill 80, you know, you're never going to get perfection because there's always nuances. But two things jump out at me. One is there's no mechanism for dealing with inflation. And, you know, we have that mechanism in the K-12 system. We have it in the state government functions at large with the standard budget system. We're missing for both community colleges and I suspect the university any kind of inflation adjustment. That's a budgeting issue and going to be a difficult one to deal with separately. But the thing that jumps out at me in looking at the results of what House Bill 80 did was that 0.8 figure for online just doesn't correspond to the reality that we've seen both here and elsewhere. And my question is, what would be the consequence if we had a simple bill that modified the current statute by getting rid of that lower figure, the 0.8 figure for online courses, and treating them the same as the other course categories, depending on whichever the course fit into, and simply repealed that 0.8.
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Senator Scott, that would be fantastic.
Did you hear her, Senator Scott? She said that would be
Ma-
fantastic.
Madam Chairman, I heard it, but my question is, what would be the practical effect as you work through your formula if we did something like that?
Dr. Caldwell or Mr. Swank?
Madam Chairman, Senator Scott, the practical impact would be that the weightings for the classes when they're used in the allocation model and for recalibration would be more precise by college, so that it would be a better reflection of their actual costs at the colleges when we use them in our funding allocation model.
Madam Chairman,
Follow up?
that's something I think, as we think about the results of what we've heard in today, that's something I think we ought to seriously consider, is making that particular change, not trying to tinker with the whole thing, but change that one that clearly doesn't work.
Okay. Alrighty, continue.
Madam Chairman, the next section is to kind of do a brief explanation of how the system works on fixed and variable costs. It is required in statute that the commission review fixed and variable costs. It's part of the variable costs are impacted by the recalibration. I do want to make that clear. So when we do recalibration, it only looks at the variable side. It does not touch the fixed side. So you're only looking at about 40% of the cost being impacted by recalibration. That's where the question about the ECA or an equivalent inflationary adjustment comes in, because at the current split among this in the system is that about 60% are fixed costs and about 40% are variable. There is nothing that deals with the constant erosion of fixed costs over time. For this particular slide, it just kind of shows you how these are defined in our rules. They've been pretty well static for, I think, since House Bill 80 came in. Did you hear anything from that? Okay. And this is where we get into the preparing for the funding allocation model. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of how the commission has set in their rules. The percentage of the certain types of cost centers they have and which ones fall in fixed and variable categories. So as we discussed earlier, instruction, 35% is thought of as fixed costs, where 65% is variable. And part of that is, as Senator Rothfuss mentioned, there is kind of you have intense initial costs, but over time, at certain levels, you're getting more efficient. But then there are what I think in our rules are called stepped variable costs. So you may get to 15 students and realize you need to have a higher level of resources, whether that's staffing or something else. So variable costs themselves are not kind of simple in and of themselves. So this is kind of how we work through every 4 years, we go through a fixed and variable cost adjustment review so that our model is reflective of the most recent information. We did that also last year. We did recalibration and the fixed and variable adjustment, and that is what's reflected in our most current draft funding allocation model that will be completed in July.
And Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, that has embedded some of what you were asking about. When does it get to a point where it is a scalable cost? And that's what Mr. Swain just described in part of that. So it is embedded in that. And it's actually available. We can get that for you.
We kind of already talked about House Bill 80, and this kind of just summarizes some of the, kind of positives and challenges that we've had with that. It does require us to reset our base period, which impacts our standard budget every 4 years. Last year we did it, and if you remember or recall in the supplement or the biennial request this past session, there was a exception request of almost -$5 million. The governor and the legislature did not accept that, but that was based on this recalibration of the base period. Only impacts variable costs, and it only looks at weighted enrollment, which comes down to full-time equivalent students. So you basically get your weighted credit hours divided by, I think, a full-time student load, and then you get your full-time equivalent students. Now, what Dr. Caldwell mentioned earlier, the particular difference between FTE and head count, well, at the colleges, you may have 7,000 or 8,000 FTE, but you actually have a head count of like 25,000. So you're getting a difference between the number of students that are actually serviced versus what the equivalent full-time enrollment might be, which aren't exactly the same things. They're not equivalent. So I just wanted to point that out. I think we've discussed most of the items on this slide, but if you have any questions, I'm open for those.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the only thing I would add is under the issues to consider is that it doesn't have the ECA. As you heard Senator Scott mention, we've brought that up before. It just assumes the value of a dollar never changes, and that's one of the issues with the fixed and the variable costs is that the variable cost is all that's considered for change on enrollment, but overall, both of those are impacted by the fact that what it costs to just operate changes just like it does for everyone, and we don't have any ability to reflect that in the numbers. So, Ms. Taylor, did you want to add on a little bit of something here, or did you want to?
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, is just that, and I think it was mentioned earlier, that all of this is happening under a compressed system. Under the Meade administration, under the Gordon administration, pretty significant budget cuts have been implemented. And we talked about this yesterday. Every college and president and trustee would say they would have rather taken the recalibration cuts than the budget cuts because they were more significant. But there's a lot of dynamic here going on. And so I just think that all of these conversations, I know they're dry, but they're so useful to understand that when we talk about sustainable funding, it's not just about X million of dollars, it's all of these components as well. And so that's really the significance of why we're here. You've already heard a few things that could be helpful. A little bit of maybe a little subcommittee doing a deep dive on the revisiting House Bill 80 and the LOIs. That could be really helpful, I think.
Madam Chairman, the next slide, before we get into the funding allocation model, is just kind of the mechanics of what we do during the four-year recalibration. It looks at that weighted enrollment for FTE, compares the most recent 3 years to the prior ending of the last recalibration period of the last 3 years of that particular academic years. And then it gives a slight weighting to the most recent on each of those. So for last year was 2021, it utilized, I believe, the academic year 2020 data that was weighted at 50% of the recalibration versus the prior two academic years were at 25% each, and then so forth for the prior base period. It's not particularly, it's very dry, but it's just at least explaining how it goes. So this particular slide gets to, and this upcoming section gets to the state funding allocation model. What I wanted to point out are a few kind of basic principles or things to keep in mind. Number one, and this was actually something I forgot to mention earlier, when you talk about the local mill levies and the local revenue, we do not address that specifically in the model. We're not actually allocating that. So when a college has their mill levies, that stays with them. It doesn't come to the state and we redistribute to equalize funding. Every college keeps their local revenue. What we're doing with the funding allocation model is utilizing state aid to try to equalize funding, but not in kind of the same way as the K-12 system. It's trying to give them money on top of their local revenue and trying to make it as equal as possible based on some basic principles of like enrollment, completed degrees, as well as trying to give them a proportion of their fixed costs that would be attributable to state aid. It does not guarantee, funding allocation model also does not guarantee how we submit our exception requests. It does not impact how much we request or how much, the recalibration. It's all separate and aside from what is in House Bill 80. As I noted earlier, when we look at the funding allocation model, we're looking at unrestricted funding for the colleges. So the colleges have fees, they have their 1 mil elected levy, they have various other revenue sources locally that we don't account for in our funding allocation model because those are all restricted, funding for their dorms, that sort of thing. So when we're looking at the funding allocation model, it's really looking at unrestricted revenue sources. So that's really state aid, their 4 mil levy, and their vehicle tax revenue. Those are kind of the big ones that impact how the allocation is made in our model.
And Madam Chair, and I wanted to get into Representative Summers' questions that he asked right here. So the optional mill is not a component of what goes into the allocation model. The colleges, the trustees are the ones who assess that optional mill. That does not need to come to the commission in any way, shape, or form to do that. And so it is within their purview. Only Gillette does not assess that mill for their operational purposes. The question that you asked is on the additional election of the mills as well. Would it help on the specificity? Right now it has to be for a special purpose. It has to be redone every 4 years, which would make it quite prohibitive to be a part of helping them manage their overall budget, because it would always be subject to that change, and at this point to a special purpose. I think we'd have to go back and find out if that would help, if they could do a more generalized. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I suspect that may vary a lot by region, but we will ask that question and see if they have a sense of that. The challenge with it, though, would be the ability to have it in any sort of stabilizing way, because it would have to be up every 4 years. So that is, I think, an inherent challenge for them in terms of being a part of the overall solution for an additional elected mill. So I wanted to mention that.
And Madam Chair, the last thing I wanted to note is the last bullet on here. When we look at the funding allocation model, we're looking at a closed system. So you have state aid, you have the unrestricted local revenue, and that's basically forms your pie. And what we're doing with funding allocation model is figuring out how best to distribute that pie, the state aid portion of it. So the circumstances of each college, their performance, their numbers on the performance metrics. So whether their participation metric, which is enrolled credit hours, their progress metric, which is completed credit hours, and their performance metric, which is completed degrees and certificates. That is all of that performance at the college level impacts how the model works. So if you have one college that is having more completed degrees and certificates, they're gaining relative to the rest of the system. They're gaining funding while other colleges would be losing some of their allocation. So it's all closed system, and we're just kind of allocating, and it'll go up and down for each college depending on some of those individualized circumstances at the colleges.
And Madam Chair, as we go on to this next slide and maybe the next slide as well, I just wanted to check on time. It's a lot of dense information. I wanted to check with all of you on this. We've got a lot of technical information here. Do we need to speed up? Do you want us to move on to certain components? We want to make sure that you're getting the information that you need, but we recognize it might be a little dry in content. So I just wanted to pause for a second and check on the next two slides. You've seen the next one before we had it, just to make sure you were aware, but we can move to the next one if you would prefer. We could even move on a little bit further. I think the one after that, where it starts with the 23-24, we could share how the new funding after the cuts played in, but that's up to you. I just wanted to check on timing, Madam Chair.
Well, it's 10:17. Committee members, we're not going to take a break, so if you need to go to the restroom, pop up and do that as you need to. I think, let's spend a little bit of time understanding what this slide means, but, we can ask questions if it's not making sense to folks, but I do want to make sure we understand it.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, as Dr. Caldwell said, this slide was something that you saw last spring or last fall. The only things I would want to note is that this is kind of the flow of the process we use to do the allocation model. There's basically three sides to it. I did want to note item B there, or kind of footnote B or whatever. That summarizes our last fixed and variable cost adjustment, where I believe in 2017 it was an absolute number of 60% fixed. It has started to migrate more towards variable costs slightly. I think it changed by about 2%. So when we go into the funding allocation model, a slight bit more of the state aid is impacted by those performance metrics, because that's what allocates the variable costs. This slide shows kind of how we go about at least figuring out what is the overall budget for each college. So we start with the prior year's allocation, and we do not include the health insurance funding, the retirement funding, any special purpose funding that was appropriated to the colleges. That's all distributed in separate methods. I kind of wrote in there how we distribute. So health insurance is on a quarterly reimbursement. Same with retirement. Library funding is generally on a reimbursement basis as well. It's not necessarily at a specific period. We get requests for reimbursement from the colleges whenever they're adding a subscription service or something like that. And then we just this year got rodeo funding. It's a flat distribution for each of the colleges that have a competitive rodeo team, which is 6 out of the 7. We look at the formula levy, and some of this I've already gone over, so I'm trying to go over it quickly. The gist of this is that when we go through this, we have to get an annualized funding or budget for the colleges in order to do the next steps. So that's kind of the last line on that little graph, annual base funding, and that's how we move forward with the funding allocation. I did want to note we did get the compensation adjustment funding out of the last bill. That is not, since that is restricted to compensation only, that is going to be a separate allocation to the colleges this biennium, but will be included within their standard budget the next biennium. Slide 28, it shows the split between fixed and variable costs. We've kind of already gone through that. We basically apply the percentage by college. So each college is slightly different. One may have 62% fixed and 48% variable. Another one might be just the opposite, 58% fixed and so forth. So we apply what they say, what we've analyzed as their base fixed cost, and we apply that directly to their state aid. So they'll get a 60% roughly share of their annual budget in state aid for fixed costs. that just comes right off the top. And then this last one is where we put in those performance metrics. So I mentioned participation, progress, and performance. Weighted enrolled credit hours is participation. So that's how many you're getting into the classes. Obviously, not all complete those classes. So the next metric is progress. Completed enrolled credit hours is the second metric, which is weighted at 25% in our variable cost allocation. And then finally is performance. There was at one point, just for your edification, is that there was plans to have a fourth metric, a fourth P, which would have been basically looking at placement of college students in the workforce. The challenge with that is that obviously you can't get a lot of access to placements out of state. It's difficult to get a lot of that information inconsistent among the colleges and their graduates. So that particular metric has basically been put on hold for the last 3 years. When we weight those metrics, we apply it to the variable costs, and then we multiply that by the remaining state aid in the budget. And that's how we actually allocate the state aid portion for their budget. Are there any questions for that?
Mr. Swank, for placement,
Yes.
are you done considering how to make that work? Or is the commission still trying to think of a way to survey the students even if they're leaving out of state? I just know that's a metric used in a lot of other attorneys, for example.
I'll just make one little comment. It has not been abandoned, I will say that. The colleges, even yesterday, brought up this idea, how do we fine tune or how do we get an efficient way of tracking graduates from the institutions into the workforce? It has not been abandoned, it's just a much more difficult metric to obtain.
Okay, Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, just a quick note on that, and with us having the sleds operational, we're hopeful that we're able to get better information around that. What we had was very inconsistent and inaccurate data, and to gather that externally was very expensive. So it hasn't been abandoned. We want to make sure that what we're doing is accurate and not allocating out funds based on what is very incomplete information across the institutions.
Understood. Representative Summers?
Madam Chairman, thank you. So just trying to understand this, because I have no idea how this works. I remember House Bill 80, and it was very complicated, and you either voted aye or nay, but that was about, I think, about anybody that didn't develop it. That's about all we know. So you have your chunk of money, right? You got your state aid, you got your local resource that's redistributed, and that equals the pot of money. And then this pot of money is split 60-40 between fixed cost and variable cost. And so my question is, it's okay on the fixed cost, so and then after these are applied, that creates each college's proportional share, is that right?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Swank?
you're right on almost everything there. I will point out that we don't actually capture or redistribute any of their local revenue. That just is accounted for in how we gauge their annual budget, if that makes sense.
No.
Okay.
So, because it's, Madam Chairman, so it was my understanding that somehow if you had a Eastern versus Western, and they have vastly different local mills, right? There's some accounting for that in this model. And so it may not be a redistribution, but somehow you're going to weight Eastern a little better than Western, or how does that work? And then I got more questions because I don't
Mr. Swank?
get this.
Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman, sorry, apologies. What you're getting to, Representative Summers, is what's on this current slide here. So you discussed kind of how each college gets their proportional share of state aid. So annually, we do that at the beginning of each biennium. We give them their allocations. On the next year, and this is kind of a rotating cycle, we do what is called recapture redistribution, which is on this slide. It is not the same as the K-12 system. We're not actually taking local revenues and applying and actually moving those around. What we're doing is we're looking at, so once that fiscal year is done, we're going to look at your actual local revenue receipts. So when we do fiscal year 2023, we're looking at projected local revenue.
Right.
So next July in 2023, we'll say, what was your actual revenue? And we'll go back in and we'll adjust up or down their next year's state aid allocation because they got slightly more than what they should have based on their projected. So it's kind of a rotating cyclical process where we're looking at, yes, you're going to give you your proportional allocation based on those fixed and variable cost calculations. And then every year we do a quick relook to make sure that what actually happened with your local revenue is equivalent or different than what is your projected revenue that was used in the prior year's model. So it's just kind of a stepped process, one after the other.
And Madam Chairman, you know, probably what I'm going to have to do is get with Michael and go over this, because what I don't understand if you equalize it entirely. So in other words, this person doesn't have as much as this college doesn't have as much as this college. In the end, we're going to swap state aid to make them all equal. That's not what happens, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is the broad principle at play, but it doesn't happen exactly because it doesn't actually take in and redistribute their local revenue. It's just the state aid portion. So you are correct. When your initial analysis, you have Eastern, and you'll say you have LCCC or Northern Wyoming Community College, or Western. Yeah, those are the biggest extremes. Western gets a proportionally smaller share of state aid because they have a larger local revenue portion in their budget. Eastern has the highest state aid proportion, but it doesn't equal out to like a cost per student or a cost, you know, that sort of thing. But it does try to use state aid to make sure that each of their budgets relative to their size. So Eastern is smaller, but they still get a larger portion of state aid for their size.
Right. Okay.
This is kind of the mechanics that we go through to do that redistribution. So come July, we'll do the new fiscal year 23 allocation, but we will also do a refinement of 22's allocation to do their the recapture, basically saying, well, maybe Western got a little bit too much state revenue based on their actual local revenue receipts, so we have to shift that to another college. So it's kind of a truthing up at the end of the fiscal year.
And Madam Chair, this is one where we've had to really do some on-the-spot intervention because it is so different from the K-12 where it all comes in and then divides out versus with the colleges, all of their local revenue, their 4 mills, their motor vehicle tax stays in that county. It is only the state aid portion. And we've had to, Ms. Taylor's had to call me at a moment's notice to say, hey, I just heard this, can you get on it very quickly? It is a point of confusion with the K-12 system, but it is truer to what happens in the districts.
All right. Madam Chairman, this last section, I think this is right before our capital construction review, is basically looking at some challenges and then some national perspectives. We've discussed most of these, so I'm not going to go over them at length, but we talked about the LOI, the concerns with the LOIs, and particularly remote or distance learning weighting of 0.008. I think it initially thought it was going to be, it would refine the calculations, but it's more complicated it because through experience, it's come very clear that it's not a less costly modality for education. The next one, we talked about the ECA in the various slides and the challenges with inflationary adjustments in the system.
Representative Summers?
So Madam Chairman, so I'm trying to catch up on all this. So these, you know, all the classwork, all this stuff, does that then, when you have all these LOIs, does that build into what is your standard budget that would be the standard budget request? So does that all build into it? So if you increase your LOIs, you're going to increase your standard budget request. That's my question. First question.
Madam Chairman, Representative Summers, the LOIs will impact the standard budget because they go into the weighting of the actual enrolled credit hours. If you adjust those, it would, I'm just trying to think about what you're doing in the recalibration is you're looking at the prior base period to the new base period. What I will say is that if the weightings are changed from here forward, there needs to be a way to make it equivalent change to the weightings prior so that you could adjust your base periods appropriately. So what I'm trying to say is, so if you got rid of the, I'm trying to think this through really quickly. If you got rid of the weighting for distance education or distance learning, LOI, and raised that up to say 1, we'd have to make sure that we have the exact same weights for the prior years in place so that we can match apples to apples in terms of the FTE versus FTE.
Okay, Madam Chairman?
Follow up?
Yeah, Madam, just so I'm gonna get my head around this, yeah. So if we raise the LOIs, does the pie get bigger? Or are we just shifting the pieces of the pie? That's the question I gotta understand.
Mr. Swank?
Madam Chairman, you are correct that the pie does not get bigger. The only way the pie gets bigger is with additional funding. And while it would slightly impact the base period adjustment with recalibration, it would not significantly change because obviously you could not accept the exception budget request. Or you could accept the exception budget request. The last 2 recalibrations have been negative. But the LOIs do impact the weighting that goes into that FTE.
Dr. Caldwell?
So, Madam Chair and Representative Summers, the way you asked that question is both of those things. It would not impact the current biennium budget. And it would not impact actually the next one. It wouldn't happen until the recalibration of the base period that would come into effect. We would have to do some work. So what it would do is, and right now, during the upcoming biennium and the next one, it would rearrange whatever funding we do have to more accurately reflect the courses that are offered across the colleges. It would come into effect, not in a huge amount, at the recalibration of the base period, which I think is something that is an important component, because then it leads to stability.
Right. And so, Madam Chairman, my last question on this, to understand the impact, right? As a former appropriator, right? So what if we get rid of the distance ed thing, right? Somebody can run the math on that at the next recalibration. That's going to increase the standard budget by X number of dollars. And so we can at least have some understanding. And for example, if we change the 1.25 back to 1.5, whatever recommendations you all have on this, right? I'm interested in what your recommendations are. And then what is the dollar impact of that in the next recalibration in the standard budget? So we can just see those numbers and have a feel for it. And I think that will make more sense to me anyway.
Dr.
Thank you.
Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Summers, that is exactly what we would like to do. And when I say we, I mean Michael. We just did not have enough time to have that all ready for you today, but this is a very high interest to us to figure out what the impact would be for you long term. So that is something that we, with your direction here, we will, Mr. Swank will calculate that information. It is important value, yes.
Team, I would like to we're on slide 33 and we still have to discuss major maintenance. So I'd like to, if we can get through your presentation by 11. As you mentioned, we also have all these wonderful college presidents, welcome Dr. Schaefer, Dr. Tyndall, Dr. Devine, Ms. Dale, and I think you said Mr. Tremblay is here as well. I just want to make sure we have anyone who wants to testify has some time to do that. So if we can hopefully get through this in another half hour, that'd be great.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, really the next few slides are just some information for you. I don't think we need to go through those in detail. We have woven those into this conversation already. You do know we work both with SHEO. I am SHEO for the state of Wyoming. And we make sure that we're looking across all of these components and that we are really paying attention to what's happening in other states and why it matters that it's a part of the state. So I don't want to belabor those points, but I wanted to provide those for you. I do on slide 38 have in here the sort of the history around the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 not being a functional actually in any state that exists and where it came from an ideal back in the 60s. It's theory, it's not practical. And we have actually a lot of information around that. So I just wanted to provide that national landscape for you. I don't feel like we need to necessarily go through that unless you have any specific questions, but I always just want to put it in front of you because we do get the questions. Have you checked with other states? Are you looking at this? And the answer is yes. And we work very closely with those entities to keep us on the right side. And with that, Madam Chair, I believe we are on to major maintenance and capital construction. And we do have a specific request around this for you from commission action in our guidance from the LSO and the LSO staff for the joint appropriations. So with that,
Madam Chair, just briefly, major maintenance does not actually go through the commission. I mean, it does.
Sort of does.
Kind of sort of does. It's mostly managed by the State Construction Department, but it kind of goes through the same process of looking at kind of the total of square footage, applying a multiplier for the replacement value of those buildings and getting the amount. That's forwarded to the State Building Commission, moved into the governor's budget and so forth. After the major maintenance is appropriated, it goes to the State Construction Department based on how it's allocated from the square footage in our capital construction funding model. So all the colleges input their facilities within this model and kind of shows which buildings are in use, that sort of thing. It also does not include their auxiliary facilities, such as facilities that earn money, whether it's your dorms, that sort of thing. So it kind of shows on the slide what are the basic facilities that are included. The commission reviews some of this information, but it's not an integral part in finalizing that particular budget request for the governor and to the legislature. Capital construction is slightly different.
a lot different.
We have statutory requirements to have this annual process of bringing forward college capital construction projects to the commission through the various processes. And then actually the next slide, it shows you kind of the detailed steps that we go through. There are different deadlines, there's different thresholds. So what I have here on slide 41 is some brief statutory references. The one that's most important, I think, here is the one 21-18-202. In order for colleges to qualify for major maintenance on a facility, this language shows that if it's going to cost $100,000 or more for a project that either involves state funding, or the key words there, or could eventually be applied for state funding, it has to go through the commission. So for example, in April, we had some projects from Laramie County Community College that went above $100,000. So the commission had to formally consider those and make recommendations and approve those so that those could go forward and eventually qualify for state maintenance. They don't come before the legislature because they don't reach the threshold of $1.5 million. Once it gets to that level or higher, it goes through the commission and the process for all state buildings, the State Construction Department, State Building Commission, governor, so forth. So that's kind of a split for capital construction. We have kind of the pieces that go in there. We do have, we will be considering a escalation factor on all projects, all currently approved projects at the next commission meeting. And the State Construction Department provided that to us at 10% this year alone. So that will be moving forward in the process come next week.
And this is the component, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that the commission wanted to bring to your attention. They did take action in their April meeting to see if that $100,000 threshold could be increased. They specifically requested an increase up to $500,000. The commission did express their concern that it creates a bit of a bottleneck. You can't build a vestibule on a building for less than $100,000 anymore. It seemed like it was a constricting number to provide assurances for major maintenance concerns. So I did inquire, because it is capital construction, does it belong here because of the commission being housed in as a committee of the Joint Education Committee, or should that go to appropriations because they manage capital construction? It was a question for us. And we did receive advice that it should come to you. So we wanted to make sure that we did bring that to your attention. The commission has made that action to request that of you, to consider increasing that amount from $100,000 to $500,000 to really remove the constriction on the colleges. It has been $100,000 since I believe 1990. It's been a very long time.
Madam Chair, I believe it's changed from 100,000, I believe, in 2008. Prior to that, it was 50,000, but that was much earlier.
Oh, right, much earlier. I think that was in the 90s then. So it's a rather low threshold that slows the colleges down on being able to proceed with really minor projects that really should be handled with him and their trustees. At least that is the opinion of the commission.
Madam Chair.
Representative Connolly?
Thank you. I'm just a little bit confused between how 2118 225A and 18202 interact with each other. If the commission has already identified and I assume approved a capital construction list, it does 202 then mandate it goes back again once funds, so I'm a little confused about the process. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, really there's two different things that occur. One is authorization for an institution to proceed, and then the other would be a prioritization and approval by the legislature. So 225 gets into the capital CapCon prioritization, where then we take that to the State Building Commission. The State Building Commission takes that on to the legislature for your authorization and potentially for funding requests for any of those projects. So it's a step process, as Mr. Swank just shared. 100,000 commission has to approve, 1.5 million the commission has to approve, and the legislature has to approve.
Okay, continue.
That, Madam Chair, I don't think that's answering your question.
Madam Chair, the next slide is that kind of detailed process. And this is really for all projects that are $1.5 million and greater. It goes through, basically starts in the spring. We have all the colleges or the colleges that desire to move forward with a capital facility project. They put it in what is called our prioritization model, and this may help Representative Connolly. It doesn't actually estimate, the actual funding needs for the project. The colleges do that prior to. But what it does do is look at, I believe, 13 capital measures. I think I have those on the slides, and prioritizes which projects at which levels apply those measures. For example, we have the strategic plan measure, which projects meet all the different components of that strategic plan measure. And then the results of that prioritize projects 1 through however many we have. And that is what's brought to the commission for recommendation to move forward. So the prioritization really is only applied to those projects at the level that go to the legislature. They're not necessarily the projects that are only $100,000, basically $100,000 to 1.5 million. That's all handled under the commission's umbrella alone.
Representative Connolly?
Yeah. So this is totally centralized. And so Western wants a new building and Eastern wants a vestibule, and Gillette has an idea, for a makerspace. The commission itself, rather than the Board of Trustees in each of the districts, service areas, makes that determination and prioritizes it and then brings it to the Appropriations Committee?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, I'm starting to understand what you're asking me. I'm starting to get there. So there's a more process behind all of what we're bringing. We're bringing you the highest level of that. So each of the colleges is required to have what is called a 5-year facilities master plan, and that is outlined in statute, that looks at the campus as a whole and what are the needs of the campus and what are the projects on the campus that are needed. So they do not bring those projects forward to the commission requesting authorization or a request for prioritization until that has gone through, is in their facilities master plan, and they have the authority of their board to bring that forward because there's a funding issue related to that. So they don't bring them forward to us until they're ready to proceed in that project. All of those, before they can come to the commission, have to have a level 1 study if they're in the prioritization level. So it has to be in their facilities master plan. They have to have, before the president sends me a formal letter and a request for that, they have to have that authorization from their board. They have to be ready to make that request. Then those come to the commission, and the commission has the statutory responsibility to put them in some sort of priority order for the consideration of the State Building Commission and for you as the legislature to determine which ones to proceed with and which ones to fund. So that prioritization does happen. a very distinct difference in that, and that's on our list. Michael will talk about that in just a moment, and that is the capital renewal project, which we work very closely with the state construction department to come up with that solid definition for what that is actually parallel to the component in the K-12. So those do all come to the commission after this back work has occurred, so that then we can put it in our prioritization and it come out as a level 2 request, a level 3 request, or potentially one that is a capital renewal that does not go to the prioritization process. Governor.
Madam Chairman, slide 43 shows the types of capital construction projects. You can imagine the different types of projects, the types of analysis and materials that are being brought forward. When we submit a packet to the commission, actually going out today, it will show the commission's priorities for those projects as recommended by the prioritization model, as well as the background documents directly from the colleges that support their request. So it will be kind of a summary sheet plus all their background documents, their level ones, their commitment from their board of trustees, that sort of thing. One of the things that came about, if you'll recall a couple of years ago, maybe more like 5 years ago now, the Western Wyoming Community College had a significant issue with their HVAC and their electrical system. That was what we call a capital renewal project. I'm not sure the exact terminology on the K-12 side, but it was a significant issue with keeping the facility functioning, not necessarily adding to it or changing it around, but basically keeping a facility functional for the purposes for which it was originally built. So the commission worked with the state construction department to kind of provide a formal process for this. And a capital renewal project is also a project that is difficult for colleges to fundraise, to try to get more local resources attached to it. So capital renewal is usually requested at the state level for 100% state funding. So the Western Wyoming project was 100% state funding at, I think, about $11.4 million. We will have one capital renewal project requested this year that'll go before the commission next week. I believe it's from Northwest College, that has kind of internal infrastructure issues with it to keep the building functional. Yes.
You mentioned HVAC. Is there another example you can give? I'm just really trying to understand the universe of what qualifies as a renewal project.
Madam Chair, yes, we actually just got a great study from Northwest College, and we do work with state construction to determine, is this really a capital renewal or is this deferred maintenance, for example? And so we have the example going on at Northwest College where their pipes underneath the building are actually eroding, and it is causing a failure underneath the building. So that would be an example where it is the critical infrastructure for the life, health, and safety of the building and for the people in that building. So it is one that is either, are we going to fix it or are we going to have a catastrophic failure of this building? So that's where that lies. It has to do with, it's not things that could be managed with major maintenance. And if they tried to address it with major maintenance, they would then create resulting deferred maintenance throughout the campus in such a way that you are going to create multiple series of capital renewal. So it is in that really function, the ability for a building to function, particularly as they age over time or had some faults in how it was built or engineered.
Madam Chairman, this slide 44 just summarizes the CapCon model, the types of measures that it goes through, types of buildings, the space needed, the utilization by students, that sort of thing. I highlighted the strategic plan measure, and that's summarized on the next slide. The College Commission is gradually updating their plan, and one of the things they did last year was change the measures for capital construction to their most recent plan. So it corresponds to educational attainment, affordability. So now when they put in their capital construction request, it has to be graded on these particular components along with the other 13 or 12 to provide for an additional piece for that prioritization in the model. This is kind of the most recent update to that prioritization piece. And then our final slide is really
Slide.
the capital construction challenges. As we mentioned earlier, due to the kind of exceptional inflation environment, particularly the last few years in construction, the commission will be addressing an escalation for all prior approved projects of 10%. Last year, I believe it was 7.2%. So as you can see, the value of projects from when they first are requested to appropriation and implementation, the costs have been going up fairly quickly. So that is a particular issue that we're looking to address at the kind of on an enterprise level for the colleges, and we'll be bringing forward a contingency request to the commission for currently approved projects.
And for those projects only in 2021 and 2022, because of the issue related to the supply chain, we've worked very, very closely with state construction department. And in fact, they provide a formal recognition of that in an amount that they thought we should request from the contingency. So that will be before the commission next week. It'll be published today. We're waiting on some sort of last details, because we recognize while we're facing this on the community colleges side, that the state's going to be facing that for all of its capital projects. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to be all woven together, but we still have the responsibility to bring that forward from the commission. So I just wanted to prepare everybody for that. And then a slight difference or nuance that I wanted to share with everyone is we do have an annual increase for the costs of projects, an escalation factor. It is a best practice. It allows the colleges the ability to exceed whatever they were originally approved for, but not additional funding for that. So there's a distinction in that. It lets them, if you can pony up the money, you can increase the cost of this, because it costs more to finish building something by the time they get funding, and 3 years later, they're at the completion of the project. So that's a best practice to do that. That increase in their approved project amount does not necessarily result in an increase. It does not result in an increase to how much they've received for funding. Hence the issue with the contingency for the projects that were approved in 2020 and 2021. It will be a one-time request that is going to come forward that we worked very closely with State Construction Department to bring forward for those 5 projects.
Questions for Ms. Caldwell and her team?
I have one, Madam Chairman.
Oh, we've got Representative Newsom online.
Thank you. Dr. Caldwell, I didn't hear that you mentioned what you might want that approval, that dollar amount to be increased to. Would that be 200,000 or some amount that you had in mind?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Newman, that would be 500,000 is what the commission took action to request an increase.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Based on the commission's push there, just serving with School CapCon, how does what they're requesting mesh up with School CapCon, or do you have any idea like what that threshold is? I'm just curious.
Mr. Swain, Ms. Caldwell?
That's a pretty tough question.
Madam Chairman, Representative Brown, I have no idea, and we will find out the answer for you.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Obermuller?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Michael, thank you. Totally impressed with how fast you've come up to speed.
Pretty impressive.
Just can't believe how much you've absorbed in a short amount of time, but great presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, committee members, thank you, or panelists, thank you. Hang out, we might have more questions as we continue to discuss these issues. I do want to get a sense from LSO, do we have anyone who has signed up online to testify on this topic? The answer is no. Who in the audience would like to testify? We see you. No one. President Schaefer, did you want to offer some remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Joe Schaefer, I'm the president of Laramie County Community College. Those of you that know me know I couldn't resist, even though I know you've been going at it for a long time. I want to hit just three quick points more to reinforce the great presentation that you just had. First thing, the funding allocation model. I've been in Wyoming now for over 10 years and worked in other states. Our funding allocation model is actually a very good model. So this is the model the commission uses to determine how much state aid goes to the different community colleges. It's a good model. It has its challenges without a doubt. Not surprising to any of us in the room. The biggest challenges with the model is the volatility in local funding that's associated with our homogeneous economic mix. And so it's why we have some deep self-interest in economic diversification and really looking at ways to stabilize the economic mix of our areas. So as you saw, there are times where local funding, so LCCC is a good example, in struggling economic times as other districts drop in assessed valuation, and LCCC or Laramie County actually is held pretty steady. It actually necessitates some fairly significant swings in state funding that create some issues. And so it's the volatility of our economy, I would say, more than anything else. But I wanted just to reinstate that the funding allocation model the commission uses to distribute those funds works. It's a good model. The state funding model has and was really intended to provide us with some predictability, some clarity in what state funding might look like for the community colleges. And that was really the genesis of House Bill 80, was to provide that clarity, because prior to that, we had an exception budget request for enrollment fluctuations, and we had sort of this legacy, how much did you receive in state aid previously, and then let's have a negotiation about whether that should increase or not. So it wasn't a very sophisticated or very effective model to determine how much the state should appropriate to support its community colleges. There are a few things that I wanted just to reiterate that it did not anticipate, and I think Dr. Caldwell said this, Senator Scott said this. The first one is it didn't anticipate inflationary changes. And especially in this environment, not having a mechanism in there to actually adjust for increased costs and inflation has been a substantial challenge. It also didn't anticipate for budget cuts during economic downturns that wouldn't necessarily also equate to increase in enrollment. And so in the 2 times we've had to recalibrate, we actually recalibrated following state budget cuts that did not have an associated enrollment increase. And so as a result for that, it actually set the model up to essentially cut the colleges twice. Fortunately, both Governor Meade and now Governor Gordon have said, you've taken your cuts, they're actually more than what recalibration would be, so let's not accept that budget request. That's a challenge, I would say. And then the one you heard of is increasing cost and reliance on distance learning, discounting distance learning to 0.8 weight. Especially in what we know now post-COVID with the integration of expensive but very effective online technologies for delivery of what used to be more tactile instruction. That probably needs to be looked at. And so the distance learning component. The last point I just want to make is just to reiterate the costs to students and the challenges with an increasing reliance on tuition revenue. And you heard Dr. Caldwell say this, and I think it's something that we need to be incredibly cognizant of. We used to be the most affordable community college system outside of California, which is sort of an anomaly in the witchy states. The University of Wyoming is still the most affordable 4-year institution in the witchy states. Community colleges now, we are above the witchy average with regard to tuition for its community colleges. To put it into perspective, tuition in Wyoming, 2-year versus 4 years, the community college versus UW is now 2-year is 63% of what the tuition cost is at the 4-year. The witchy average is about 40%. So at a time when we're trying to engage more individuals in higher education, those that probably don't come from and have the means, that are really the foundations of the community college's access and affordability mission, we're becoming less and less affordable. Now take into account the wage wars at the service level jobs. So jobs that are important and certainly part of any economy. We talk about the Chick-fil-A hourly wage in my area right now. That increasing wage level with an increasing cost of tuition is actually forcing many students, young students, to defer higher education and instead go into what I would argue are shorter term occupational occupations because of the increasing wages. And so Tuition is something that we have to simply be cognizant of, and as we have challenges in funding for community colleges, if our answer is just to keep going back and asking the students that probably can't afford to go to college right now to pay more, we're just going to end up actually pushing them out of post-secondary education instead of engaging them in. It's why we support things like Wyoming's Tomorrow and other conversations around need-based aid. So thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, for allowing me a few moments just to sort of hit those high notes.
Thank you. President, questions? Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. A question I have on, so the ECA, obviously a wild topic, right? Because I mean, even at the K-12 level, you see what we do. We evaluate it every year and then we negotiate, haggle, do all that stuff. So if we looked, and obviously if we did an ECA for community colleges, we'd have to look at it for UW as well, because it's inflationary pressures are across the board on all education, right? It doesn't matter at what level. So would it be ideally, would it be a system like K-12 where we evaluate the cost pressures every year, every 2 years, for example? And then the legislature makes a recommendation. Would it be something you all or UW would evaluate and then bring as an exception request? How would you envision a process? Because an automatic ECA into your block grant every 4 years is, probably not going to happen, right? At least that would be my guess. So how would we construct an ECA process or an inflationary adjustment process? And I think this is just a question for you guys to consider. You've probably already considered it, but take some time to think about that process of what that would look like, so you could come back with a recommendation.
President Schaefer, you're welcome to respond if you've given it a thought.
No, Madam Chair, I would gladly take Representative Summers out not to respond at this time, because I think it is a complex topic.
Or Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I'll respond to it with the idea that realistically, and this is true for K-12 education, inflation happens every year. We know what the numbers are. And the fact that we've taken it upon ourselves to agree or disagree to inflation every year doesn't deny its reality. So the right answer, but I appreciate the fact that you didn't give it, is it should be an automated component of statute that we don't even talk about because there just are right answers. That's the right answer to this question, same as for K-12. We've chosen to insert ourselves in that process, and we do spend an awful lot of time on the K-12 ECA trying to determine which aspects of it will give and how much we'll give, but we know the outcome of that is that over the past 2 decades-ish, I guess a decade and a half, we've effectively diminished the purchasing power of our K-12 funding model, because sometimes we give it, sometimes we don't, and we never overgive it. Sometimes we give it one time. So all of that creativity sounds great if you're the legislature, but if you're just an objective economist looking at, well, inflation has gone up 3.2%, therefore the pie should grow by 3.2%. I still struggle at understanding why we continue to engage in that exercise of, I guess, inaccurate recognition of economics. And so I would love to see us finally just admit that inflation is real and it happens every year, and to go with it. But I do agree with your statement that probably won't happen.
Dr. Schaefer, I did have one question. How many of the BAS students came out of Laramie County, and what degrees did you offer, just to inform this committee?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We had 17 applied baccalaureate graduates, and I believe that they were 9 and 8, 9 in the healthcare administration, and then 8 in the applied management. All of them either have jobs, have promotions, or will continue to advance in their current occupation. So very, very, very proud of those programs.
Super. And then do you have off the top of your head any information about, to Representative Conley's question about how many high school students are either, dual or concurrently enrolled in your program? Maybe those numbers are fresh in your mind.
Madam Chairman, so we have those numbers. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I will tell you nationally, the increase of the community colleges enrollment at our high school-based population is a trend that continues to accelerate, and I think it's has very little research regarding the long-term impacts of doing that. There's some good research about the success of those students that participate in early college. But as Dr. Caldwell said, I think we can get you the numbers and the distribution of those based on concurrent versus dual for high school-based populations.
Any other questions for Dr. Schaefer? Representative Harshman.
And thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and probably don't need to answer this one either, but you can punt on this. But, you know, we've spent our time this morning talking about the funding model and maybe some shortcomings, the inflation adjustment, and the online multiplier. And those are areas where we've kind of underfunded probably. And are there areas where we've maybe overfunded that we need to look at? I mean, it seemed to me like the concurrent thing, and I think Representative Conley is one area. I mean, and not that it's a huge amount, but maybe as we kind of true this whole thing up to make it reflect the costs, it might make it an easier kind of piece of work to work through the legislature. Are there some areas there we could look at as well on the other side? Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Harshman, speaking just for myself, I think if you were willing to engage with the community colleges to look at some of those nuances of what was House Bill 80 and that model, I think certainly having the conversation around all of the components, including concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment, are probably worth revisiting.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Not so much a question, Dr. Schaefer, more a little bit of just maybe pontification if I can, but it's a completely different world right now than where we were 6 years ago when I entered into the legislature. And this discussion that my counterpart here is saying that inflation is real, there's no doubt about it. And I think we all recognize that. But we all have to recognize as well that until we can do something about our boom and bust cycles, these discussions of whether or not inflation is real is really not the discussion. It's whether or not we can afford the inflation. And that's really the ultimate crux of what we're talking about here. I'd love to get into more of the 0.5 versus 0.25. I can tell you we have the same discussion when it comes to school facilities across the state. You know, what's a 0.7 versus a 0.6? We have really gotten very deep into the weeds, and we have a lot of stuff that we've severely cut and reduced services to our state over the past 6 years. We're now looking at it being able to possibly help that. But the thing that we have to continue to look at, and I think this is for all of us as a group here, is that we're in a completely different situation than where we were 6 years ago. And the fact that we can have this discussion now just means that in another 10 years or another 3 years, whatever, I don't know, we're going to have another bust and we're going to be going back and cutting again. And so we need to be more cognizant of what we're actually talking about is not whether or not we can afford the 0.8 to 1.0. That's not what we're talking about. It's whether or not we truly want to fund that and continue that funding as we go along. And so it's tough to put the community colleges or any place of government for that matter in this situation, but I appreciate you coming up, and I do appreciate the Community College Commission for bringing us forward all of the information, especially House Bill 80 from 2016. That was a very big, informative piece of information for me. So thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Yeah,
Dr. Schaefer.
Madam Chairman, Representative Brown. So one thing I would say is I agree. I think it's why it's critical, especially at a juncture where the state might be have the financial resources for significant one-time investments for us to think about how we address some of those issues. It's why we support the Wyoming Innovation Partnership and the concept of collaborating with economic development, workforce services, and higher education to focus on economic diversification and growth for the state to remove some of that volatility. What I will tell you is one thing, and one thing probably only, is going to be the preeminent indicator or factor, if you will, in economic growth and diversification in the future, and that's talent. It's going to be people, and it's going to be people with certain skills, and the community colleges sit uniquely positioned in the state to prepare that workforce and really to provide that talent pipeline. And if we can't provide that talent pipeline, we can't diversify our economy, grow our economy, which means we won't be able to have those conversations about how we continue to invest in critical government services, including education. So,
Representative Summers, then Representative Conley.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And Joe, as you mentioned something, I thought it was really important, and that is that we do have some one-time money likely coming up, right? We're seeing like a pop. And so as we do have one-time money, we talked the last time about, an endowment for community colleges that didn't go anywhere. We kind of, we lost several bills, kind of out of this committee. But what would be the most effective way to utilize some of that one-time money? Obviously, that's can't go into operations unless we do it in an endowment form. So I think that would be another ask, would be what would be you guys' recommendation of how we could put some one-time money aside for community colleges or higher education altogether. Maybe it's the Wyoming Tomorrow, right? Maybe that's where we do it. So give that some thought as well. Maybe you have some ideas.
Dr. Schaefer?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Summers. So obviously, Wyoming's Tomorrow presents that opportunity. I'll take this as an opportunity to maybe change the narrative on that. I think that Wyoming's Tomorrow has been labeled a community college priority. And while we support it, I mean, we need to be clear, it's a Wyoming priority. We're talking about investing in people who are already place committed here, likely to stay here and advancing their education so that they can actually feed the future of our economy with that. And so while we support that, I would tell you that we got to shift that narrative. It's a Wyoming priority. And I would agree, now's the time to invest in that endowment so that we'll actually benefit from it well into the future, including during bus times. And so if we can utilize those one-time funds to do that type of thing and have that type of impact, that's where I think we all need to be pushing.
Okay, and Dr. Caldwell, did you have a follow-up?
Madam Chair, I do have an answer to your question about the dual and concurrent. It is posted on our enrollment report. I just wanted to make sure I responded to that. System, this was for the fall 21, so this was just last fall. Total system-wide, I will tell you that the percent of student credit hours that was concurrent enrollment was 14.1%, and the percentage that was dual enrollment was 5.9%. And it varies across the colleges, but it is the public document, and I'll get it to you, but I wanted you to have that, just you to ask that question.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, my question was really Representative Summers' question as well. But to be kind of more specific about thinking about this kind of this money that's possible for us to be investing right now, is the request of the commission and of the college trustees that we consider that one-time money or that we rethink the community college funding model? Those to me seem to be two different kind of questions and possible answers.
Dr. Caldwell or Ms. Taylor?
Madam Chairman, Representative Connolly, this is why we had our conversation yesterday that I mentioned earlier, bringing together all of our voices, the presidents, the trustees, the commission staff, the commissioners, because there's a lot of horses running here, and it's not really one or the other. Really comprehensively, how it all fits together is why we're so excited to be having this, meaty conversation with you this year, last year, to really explain to you how detailed things are. And so when you talk about the allocation model, yeah, there are some things that could be really helpful with that. But like I said earlier, that's not the one thing that fixes everything. Utilizing one-time dollars to fund this really unique opportunity that Wyoming has put forward with the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship to help increase our educational attainment. That's scholarships to help citizens in your communities. That's a huge opportunity. That is something that's really important. Coming up with some sort of a stabilization funding, mechanism that I think was the idea from the endowment. That's really got some neat benefits, and we really think that could be cool to bring a little bit of certainty of what could increase the state aid on a yearly basis. That's something that we like that idea. but they all fit together. And what I kind of wanted to add to this is, I would almost turn the question around to you is, you know, what are your goals and priorities for the community colleges? And how does this all fit in with what your vision is for the community colleges? Because the colleges are doing a whole lot of things, as you've seen. And they're all building blocks to building an educated citizenry, diversifying our workforce, meeting the needs of our industries and businesses. And so I think it's a conversation we have together.
Representative Connolly?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll go back to my very first question, the one where I was teased that you know the answer to it. Because one of the things that's always kind of just bothered me is that we have a system where a lot of the funding for the community colleges comes from mill levies in service districts where 2/3 of the state doesn't participate in it. And I'm curious if your bodies have kind of talked about that. And Joe's looking at me saying, yeah, your county is one of them. And I'm completely guilty. And I honestly don't think it's fair. But I am curious how you have talked about that. And honestly, kind of the language that I'm hearing right now, it's about what do we want as a state for our community colleges when we honestly have a community college system that is set up by service areas where only a portion pay.
Ms. Taylor?
Madam Chairman, Representative Connolly, we have absolutely talked about that. And I'll just remind the committee through the work of the Community College Task Force Funding and Governments. I'm going to mess that up. So the Wyoming legislature had a special task force a couple of years ago, a select committee looking at community college funding and governance. One of the most comprehensive studies on community college funding, service territories, the whole bit that I've seen in my tenure, I will tell you that. And then the Community College Commission themselves, because they were tasked from the Appropriations Committee to say, well, what kind of options, you know, would you put forward? What kind of ideas? And so the Community College Commission, which was comprised of, you know, a lot of people in this room, trustees, presidents, and a lot of smart people, put together several ideas of how we could achieve a more statewide sustainable funding, since all 23 counties are served by the community colleges. And so it ranges from the base counties and then adding the additional 16 counties or a whole statewide mill. Like, you know, we have a spreadsheet that we can show you with all of those options on it. And so the work has been done to show what would this look like. The broader conversations, though, are what didn't happen, because that committee that was a legislative task force didn't sponsor any of those ideas. And that's the year that we had a bill to create Gillette College. So the work's all been done, but we just haven't had what's the next step, and how do we have those conversations thoughtfully and, you know, with all of the partners that we have who are sitting behind me in this legislative space, and they have not moved to the floor of either body.
Madam Chair, if I may, just to add on to what Ms. Taylor shared, because I think she just said that so beautifully. If there could be maybe some small work groups to work on different components of this, it isn't a one size fits all. It's going to take multiple components to that. On the student side, as Dr. Schaefer shared, Wyoming's Tomorrow is a Wyoming effort, and it doesn't serve just the community colleges. Students, university students will also use that scholarship. So I think that's an important thing to note. So if there could be something, as Ms. Taylor suggested, maybe some small work groups to work on hammering these components out, then you would have some options on how you think things should move forward.
Representative Nyman?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just out of curiosity, as I've listened to the discussion, what about the potential of being able to offer, because community colleges are kind of geared towards setting people out and, you know, getting them engaged in the process right now. You're developing electricians, welders, all these different things that businesses need right now to perform. We're struggling up in our part of the country. You can find people that can handle concrete and do a good job of actually handling concrete. why wouldn't we be willing to look at tax incentives for businesses that invest in the community college funds to encourage them to, I mean, if we're going to take their money from them and redistribute it to you, is what government does. It redistributes wealth. That's what we do. Why don't we look at ways to incentivize giving to these businesses, because they affect the entire state no matter where they're at. They have direct impact on the state of Wyoming. Instead of trying to figure out how we can increase the mill levies, let's say, hey, you know what? What about reducing the amount of property tax that you pay is that even possible? I might have people here, lawyers that are lined up saying you can't do that. But why wouldn't that be a logical thing to say, hey, you know what? We're going to help you get interested in investing in our colleges, because we're developing the people that you desperately need. And so we're going to incentivize it and build that public-private partnership, or increase more giving to these endowments, which would create a more stable earning environment, and look at different ways outside of the box to incentivize it through a reduction in, because I mean, our mineral industry pays 100%. You know, so I mean, would they be willing to say, hey, if you paid less, but if you give it to something like this, is that something that could be looked at, even changed legislatively, to be able to allow that opportunity to be afforded to our businesses to help the colleges in education?
Dr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, Representative Nyman, it is one of the, when Ms. Taylor talked about this whole broad matrix, the Sustainable Funding Work Group brought forward a series of recommendations, but it wasn't exhaustive. And I think that's important to recognize, is looking at different types of options or triggers around that is something that could certainly be considered. I don't know the tax law around that. I don't know what it would take to do that. So that would be a policy question on your end of it. Certainly different avenues to do that. I know one of the things that we have been looking at, and we're having the ability to do this right now with Wyoming's Tomorrow, is how can private business and industry contribute to the state and it still be considered, for example, a charitable gift. There are restrictions on that. And that's one of the challenges that we're trying to work through on that side. So I don't know what the implications would be. I don't know I don't know the answer to that. I think it's something worthy to explore if that's what this committee would like to do. I do know it has tax implications.
Okay. Further questions for our panelists? We have a newcomer. We gotcha. See, it's so fun to testify. Welcome.
Madam Chair, I will be brief. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, and that's a very uncomfortable place to be. My name is Dr. Darren Devine. I'm the president of Casper College, but I speak to you today as the president of presidents. I held back from my good friend Joe. He is, as Dr. Caldwell told you, he is recently being elected to the chair of the board on the Association of Community College, American Association of Community Colleges. So I wanted you to be able to hear from his perspective, as he has a very good pulse of the national conversation. I also know Joe is my good friend, and I know not to get in between him and a microphone. And that first part is a joke. The second part is not. Actually, vice versa. Joe is a good friend. And the reason I wanted to stress this, I want to give you an assurance. I am currently empowered to speak for the presidents for the last year and a half and for one more year. I do want to give you the assurance that we are friends. You know, you get this idea out there, it's just human nature, and large organizations, that we're at each other's throats, that we disagree, that we're always fighting amongst each other. I assure you that's not the case. Is there an easy button for community colleges? No, there's not, in this state nor any other state. We're all serving the needs of our communities, and then that feeds up into the broader needs of the state. It's like sausage making. It gets messy. Right? There is no easy button, but I assure you that there is not continual strife. There's not continual bickering. The folks behind me with community colleges are my friends, and I think you would find that each would say the same. The same thing with the commission and with WACD. As Dr. Caldwell mentioned, I spend a lot of time on the phone, on email, in person with Ms. Taylor, with Dr. Caldwell. We talk continually. There are some days, much to Sandy's chagrin, that we talk 4 or 5 times. This is just the nature of the beast. I also want to show you one last thing before I make a concluding point. The same exists with UW. You know, there's this idea out there that, you know, the community colleges don't support the university, and you know, there's all this strife. No, there's really not. The community colleges and UW are siblings. UW is obviously the older, stronger sibling, right? Maybe a little bit mean. No, sorry. But we're siblings. Is there going to be sibling rivalry? Absolutely, right? But is there, you know, is there some idea that we don't support one another, that we don't want the best for each other, that we don't want to make sure that what we do is the best for our state? No, there's not. We really are partners in this endeavor. And I'll finish up, and again, that idea of lunch is looming large in my mind and standing between you. I would just offer one last point. All too often, I think, and not that anyone on this committee has done that, because I do want to tell you that I've sat through a lot of committee meetings in multiple different states, and today's meeting is one of the more thoughtful that I've sat through. Every single question. And I promise you, anyone who knows me is, no, I'm not trying to shine you on. Unfortunately, I'm not that polished or that intelligent. Every question that was asked today is very thoughtful. It was very thoughtful, very probing, and I was very impressed. I want to make one caution in general, that when we get to funding models and we start looking at, as Senator Office brought up, which always comes up, right? This idea of 60, 40, 30, 20, 50, you know, whatever. We all want that easy button. We all want that, you know, what's the magic number? The magic number is, well, 2 things: more and not enough. What the state has to decide is how much the state can put into its future, whether we're talking K-12, whether we're talking community colleges, whether we're talking UW. That really is what it comes down to, right? It was my wife and I recently bought a home, and my financial advisor reminded me, look, you know, every dollar you're spending on your home is an investment. You know, it's money spent, but it's an investment. Well, the money that you're spending in K-12, in community colleges, in UW, is an investment for the state. So that elusive number is always going to be elusive, but it's really not a number. It's the investment into the state's future. And I thank you for your probing questions and your thoughtful responses to that question, which shows this is one of those issues that we're always going to wrestle with. And I thank you for wrestling with that.
Questions for President Devine? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Okay, committee. I think public comment is closed unless anyone pops up really quick. Seeing no one jumping up, we heard a couple of suggestions. If this time, if anyone would like to make a motion, I'd be curious to know what's on your mind.
Madam Chair?
Representative Connolly?
Madam Chair, I mean, there's a couple of ways to go about this. There were some concrete suggestions that we can just ask for bill drafts to take care of those. There's also, I think, perhaps we should see if there's the interest or desire to carry on this topic in order to do a more thorough kind of vetting of the issues. I'm willing to make a motion for, you know, several of these little elements, or that we continue this discussion, and perhaps I think it was a suggestion for a working group or two to have more clarity about what should go forward at subsequent meetings. So either one of those. The latter would take, what's the interest of the committee? If we want to take a good and more thorough look at the model, as well as opportunities for one-time funding, I think we should have a working group that would then present at our next meeting in a 2-hour block, right? Not in an insignificant block. Or I'm willing to make a series of little motions.
Committee members, I'm trying to dance a little delicately. This is not my permanent post, so appreciate that. If you want me to pick what we do at our next meeting, I'd be happy to do that, but I don't think that's appropriate. I certainly think that we have had some legislative discussion about requested changes. I think, having a bill draft as a springboard to advance those conversations seems appropriate. But I think this is a complicated topic. We've had good success in this committee last year, in getting small working groups together. I think Representative Summers, and we worked on the Wyoming's Tomorrow offline with stakeholders, and that seemed to work well. So I think that makes good sense too for people that want to dive into this issue. Representative Obermuller?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I think Representative Connolly's on the right track with the smaller groups. I know one of the things that was clear that has kind of fallen through the cracks or were the recommendations for funding that didn't involve taking from Peter to pay Paul. My own experience in this is that the idea of trying to grab money from somebody else to pay for this just isn't going to make it across the finish line. We have to find new sources of revenue. So I think, but that needs to be looked into. It sounds like the work's been done on that, and I would be willing to participate in that for the next meeting.
Representative Summers?
Madam Chairman, I'm kind of like Representative Connolly. I could make a motion on the distance ed thing on the LOI, but I think the bigger question is, what about all the LOIs and what do they look like and whether we should take a look at that? And I don't want to volunteer Representative Obermuller, but at the same time, he's got a very good background to understand all of this. And so I just think that there needs to be a small group that works on LOIs, and I think there needs to be a small group that works on the funding issue. And the problem is, we're in the middle of, I hate to say it, but we are in the middle of campaigns, and I don't know that we're going to get anything done for at least until the end of the primaries. To be able to
Madam
do so.
Chairman.
But I think those two need worked on.
Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, I'm going to make a couple suggestions. I think the overall, we heard two specific things that were problems. One is that 0.8 figure on the distance learning courses. That seems to be something that just doesn't work. And I think a simple bill on that we ought to request to have drafted. Same thing on raising that 100,000 figure to 500,000 in terms of the things that had to come through the commission. I think if we developed a draft on those two things, that'd be a good idea. The broader funding issue, I don't know whether that we're really going to get anywhere on that as a committee. We have obviously the Wyoming Tomorrow issue where we need to get that funded back up to the 50 million that triggers its implementation. That's obviously an issue, a floor issue for the coming session. I don't know what the committee can do to add to that at this point. And frankly, the various property tax schemes that we've heard and we're aware of, they haven't gone anywhere in the past. They'll be seen as a tax increase. I don't think you can get them out of the house. To be blunt about it, I don't see any point in wasting a lot of time on that.
Chairman Scott, this is your committee. When it comes to the two specific items, do you want us to take a vote on whether or not we should direct LSO to draft those bills, or is that something that you and your co-chairman can do through directive? I'm seeking your guidance on this one.
We can do it one of two ways. I'll move that we, on those two issues, that we do get bill drafts drawn.
It's been moved by Senator Scott, seconded by Representative Summers. Any discussion? All those in favor of having LSO prepare bill drafts on the LOI and the raising of the 100,000 to 500,000, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. That motion's there were some no's. I think that motion's passed. LSO, did you have any questions, or do you have enough information and guidance to proceed? Like, sounds like they're good. Chairman Scott, did you have any other remarks?
Madam Chairman, we need to, in terms of proceeding further on the other funding issues, I'm going to ask that you give the chairman some latitude in terms of how we schedule things. As we saw yesterday, we've got a lot of the K-12 issues that are capable of taking a lot of time. So give us some latitude in how we schedule things as to what extent we go into some of the other community college things in the future.
Sounds good. Alrighty, committee members, we're ahead of schedule. I thought about trying to jump in with our discussion on career and technical ed programs, but I think maybe we're all due for a little bit of a longer lunch. So how about we adjourn until 1 o'clock, and then we'll come back and jump into CTE.